west of Queen Creek that goes spicy.
West of Queen Creek.
Oh, he's starting to lose stuff.
7.
Alright, he threw some things out of the car, right? We're right there. He's throwing some things on the passenger side. They're along the wall, the four-lane wall. 619, he's throwing dope out the window. We got Bill and marijuana coming out.
619, I copy Bill.
It is
Marijuana
ridiculous.
coming out of the window at 2328.
Welcome to my podcast. Thank you so much for coming on. You're Ken Volkmer with the Pinal County Attorney's Office.
That's correct. I'm your elected representative from the County Attorney's Office.
Thank you so very much for coming down here, making the drive. And I apologize for that, but we just had a very long conversation before we got started, and I wanted to get rolling because we're talking about some really good stuff. But moving in forward, one of the things is that I'm a former police officer, you know that, and I have not been able to access any other police departments or any other county agencies other than Pinal County. I don't know why. I can't get through to those people. They know my mission. It's just an automatic, no, we're not doing that. No, we're not having people on. And my very first person from Pinal County was Matt Thomas, Deputy Chief Matt Thomas. And then from that, I had Frank on. And then I've had Ross on, and now I'm having you on. And so my goal was to, the Pinal County people have been open and with welcoming arms and want to come and have conversations and want to talk and want to, educate the public and all that. So I wanted to present to you a hat from the Blue to Green podcast, and I'm keeping the hats as specific to the Pinal County people.
I love it. I appreciate it.
Because you guys have been the ones that have been open and welcoming and all that type of stuff. So very, very limited edition. You, Frank, and Ross are the only ones that have it.
I love it.
So I appreciate but you coming on here. But that's the thing though, like there's so many freaking things that I want to talk to you about everything. And I just wanted to kind of cover, like I did put it out to my group and say, what questions would you have for a Pinal County attorney? And as we talked before, I'm friends with Julie Gunnigal.
Absolutely.
And Julie goes, ooh, I got a list.
Julie was in my office when she ran. She actually came down to my old office at her old building over on Butte. So I've had an opportunity to have a pretty decent conversation with Julie in the past.
And she said nothing but good things about you.
Well, she might have lied.
No, she's a wonderful person. But no, I just wanted to get started. And again, like the focus of this conversation today is just about like, there's so much shit going on. Like we're hot on the heels of the fact that the DEA just announced the fact that they're considering rescheduling of cannabis, which is obviously I'd like to talk about that. Right. But if we could just kind of dive into your background just a little bit, what, led you down the path of wanting to become an attorney, all that type of stuff. And what led you to wanting to become the Pinal County attorney? Because, I'm talking a lot and I don't want to do that. I want to shut up. But like people don't comprehend the fact that Pinal County, one, it's pretty big, but it's in the heart of everything that's going on right now regarding immigration, it's like a hot spot for everything going on in the world, everything going right and wrong. So I'll
the
shut
story
up.
Getting here, not that exciting. I grew up in a small Midwest.
Perfect.
Small Midwest community in north central Ohio.
Okay.
Raised in a pretty normal family. I was a good athlete. I ended up playing college basketball for a while. I loved school. I was blessed with being fairly intelligent and being able to pick things up pretty quick. So I get to my end of my junior year and I'm like, I'm not ready to work an 8-to-5 job. So I decided, I think I'm going to go to law school.
Okay.
Opens up a lot of doors for me. I graduate from law school. I married my high school sweetheart and she was a teacher. We were in Akron, Ohio at the time. Akron, Ohio was on the southern end of the snow belt.
Okay.
During my second year of law school, the third time my wife woke me up at 5 a.m. to go shovel 20 inches of snow. I said, we're going somewhere else. So we looked. The only place, frankly, we could afford to live at that time, this would have been 2006-ish, 2005, 2006, was Arizona.
Okay.
And then we kind of looked. She applied for some jobs. She was hired within 24 hours of an application to be a special education teacher at Cascarain Elementary School District. So we moved down there. I moved down there. I started working in private practice for a local law firm. It was Cooper and Reeder.
Okay.
Steve and Liz are two great individuals. They gave me my first crack at it.
Doing defense work?
Everything.
Okay, gotcha.
We had defense contracts. We were the city prosecutors for like Eloy. And
kidding.
A lot of your small communities will actually contract with local law firms to actually provide their prosecutorial and city attorney services.
That's totally news to me. Didn't know that.
Maricopa County, not so much.
Right. Yeah. No.
But you get to this, if you have more, maybe less than 25 or 30,000 people, very rarely do they hire their own in-house attorney. They just contract that
Okay.
out.
Interesting.
So had very little prosecution experience, but I worked for this group for about 5 years, and then I decided to start my own law firm. I actually took 2 people from the public defender's office, and we started a 3-person law firm. We were very, very successful.
Okay.
And this gets to the heart of the question you asked. So what really made me run for county attorney it was twofold. There were 2 sort of defining moments, I think, in my defense career, if you will. The first was I represented at one time a grandfather, his son, and the grandson, all in criminal cases, and all 3 had substance abuse issues.
Okay.
The grandfather had spent the vast majority of his life in and out of prison. His son spent the majority of his adult life in and out of prison, and now their 15, 16-year-old son was going down that exact same path.
Generational issues.
It is. And I'd asked at that time the county attorney that was assigned to the case in the juvenile department, or the juvenile division, I said, what are we going to do different for this kid that we didn't do for his dad or his grandfather? And they essentially said, that's not our problem. And that didn't sit well with me.
Okay.
It didn't. And then right about that same time, I represented a gentleman who was a sovereign citizen who could not stand me, but he, had the I'm not driving, I'm just a traveler passing through in his windshield. He was stopped by DPS. He essentially refused to comply with all demands. Ultimately, he was physically removed from the vehicle. He ended up being taken down, but when he was taken down, he had his face on the ground and he busted his lip.
Okay.
When he rolled over, he spit all over the DPS trooper, blood all over him. And of course, I was a contract attorney that time for the county. I mean, you don't get to pick your clients. You're just on a contract list, and if the public defender's office, for whatever reason, can't represent them, they get assigned to you. So I represented this gentleman, and I did a bang-up job as a defense attorney.
Good.
We went through the entire thing, and what I had discovered is they never moved into any evidence showing blood on the face of the trooper
Okay.
or on his uniform.
Okay.
So I didn't say anything till it came to closing argument. And I went through and I said, look, we've got hundreds of images, and I'm just clicking through showing all the images. And, we've got all of this. We've got dash cam video. We've got all of this stuff. But what we never actually saw was one drop of blood on the trooper's face, on his jersey or his uniform or anywhere else. Don't you think if there was blood there that one of these thousands of pictures would have shown it? And, I rest and I feel frankly pretty good about myself. Like I literally sit down, I'm like, that was good. So the way it works is after you rest, the jury then goes back to deliberate, and I walk out and I walk over afterwards respectfully, and I shake the trooper's hand, and he's quite frustrated. And I said, hey, it's not personal. I'm just doing my job. And he's like, I'm not mad at you. He's like, I actually framed my uniform to remind myself of the danger that I'm in every single day. He's like, that jersey's actually, or that uniform's actually framed in my office. And I never thought about moving it into evidence. I never thought about taking pictures of it because I see it every single day. I will tell you, as a human being, I felt about, ooh. And I just thought, I ended up getting it was a guilty on a simple resist, not the physical resist, not the ag assault. So I remember thinking, this should be the high of my career as a defense attorney.
Right. You did a good job in defending.
Brought me no personal satisfaction. And you combine that with this idea that the county attorney's office is uniquely situated, given the way that our criminal justice system is set up, that we can really dictate how cases are resolved.
Right.
And there's a lot of things that we can do to help and force people into help and put people, what now I call kind of the pathway to redemption and rehabilitation, that was not being used. And I thought I could do better, quite frankly. I thought that we needed different leadership there. I chose to run.
Who was the previous county attorney?
Lando Voiles.
Okay.
He was a career prosecutor from
Gotcha.
Maricopa County. He was a very tough on crime prosecutor, very law and order, very close with the sheriff's office. And when I ran, he was the incumbent, and I ran as hey, there's a better way. There's a smarter way to do justice. That's what I ran on then. That's what I still believe today. I know it's a long-winded answer, but I'm an attorney and a politician, so sorry.
And speaking of that, though, you are up for re-election.
I am. So I in 2016, I ran against the incumbent. I was successful. 2020, I was fortunate enough not to have a challenger, so
Okay.
I ran unchallenged, and now I am being challenged in the primary, but I am running for my third and what will be my final term, provided the people will have me.
Final term of your own choosing?
Own choosing. There's no statute of limitations. I guess there's no, I'm drawing a blank on what they call it, term limits.
Term limits, yeah.
I've just got 3 kids.
Understood.
I was very, very financially successful early in my career. Government service, as you know, doesn't do real well. And now I'm going to have 3 kids that are college age coming up. So the plan is to go back and try and make sure that I can provide a little better for my family.
Gotcha.
So, and the reality is I never wanted to be a career politician. I came in with a goal in mind. I'm most of the way there. I'm not all the way there yet. I'd still like one more term to finish a couple things that we're working on. But at that point, there's nothing that I'm there for running for other than I've just been there.
Understood.
And I just don't think that's...
You needed a job and you kind of stuck with it.
Exactly. That's what it is. It's and frankly, this is, if done right, this is a challenging job. And it's exhausting, and there are a lot of late nights. There's weekends. If done right, job wears on you.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, I had a full head of brown hair when I was elected. Now it's thinning and white. So,
Yeah, inevitably something always happens. I always forget something. Well, and you are in a very, very unique position. Like I said, talking about this particular county, because you see everything. You see immigration issues. You see all of the stuff that's happening in the world. It comes through Pinal County. And when I had Ross Teeple on, we talked about the fact that even though Pinal County doesn't actually physically touch the border, it kind of sort of actually does because of the reservations that are down there. And I mean, if the numbers haven't changed since when I was out there on the road, 80% of all drugs was coming through Arizona.
what we were most recently updated on is at least 60% of all fentanyl pills certainly are.
That come across into this country are coming through Pinal County.
The Arizona deserts, which naturally funnel through us. What's happened is most of our cartels now have really focused. They've specialized, if you will.
Okay.
So various cartels will do meth. Various cartels will do
okay.
fentanyl. Will do liquid meth. So it doesn't mean they don't dabble,
Right.
but they have a primary product that they're bringing in. Our primary product is fentanyl, the poison that's killing us on a daily basis in our community, in the state, and the nation as a whole.
How bad is it here in Pinal County specifically? Is it as bad as everywhere else?
It's probably actually a little bit worse.
Okay.
And the reason is just our location.
Yep.
So when drugs are brought in, it's not normally one person that brings it from, the middle of Mexico across the border into the United States. There are multiple exchanges that occur. Just given our proximity to 10, our proximity to Interstate 10, Interstate 8, are just removed from the border, what ends up happening is we often become a exchange point.
Yep.
So what happens is most of these people that are bringing drugs in now, they're not evil, terrible, horrible people. They're getting kids. They're getting women. They're getting people that are desperate. They're offering them some cash, and they're turning a blind eye.
Where exactly are these people being recruited from? Because I've heard of different. Back in the old days, it was you found some dude hard on his luck, and you gave him some money. You said, "Don't open up the trunk. Drive this car to California or wherever.
Yep.
Have a nice day." But now we have social media. We have apps. Where are these people getting recruited from?
It's usually social media.
Okay.
And they are partnering with local street gangs.
Oh, cool.
And what they're doing is then they're using the street gangs' influence to get people to do it. But what ends up happening is you tell a kid, we've seen some of these texts that are just heart-wrenching. Like literally, we've seen, again, my words, not theirs, but this is the gist. I know that your mom's sick. I know that your mom needs chemo. I know that you guys don't have any money. And the only way your mom's ever going to get that treatment is if you make money. So you can make $4,000 tonight by driving your car, going down, picking people up, and coming back. You're telling that to a 16 or a 17-year-old kid. You're reaching out saying, I know that your family doesn't have any money, and you're going to get kicked out. Your whole family's going to be homeless. You have the ability to fix that, and they're playing on these young kids' emotions. So 16, 17, 18, 19-year-old kids. I mean, shoot, we had somebody that was in med school that was struggling to pay, that we ended up prosecuting, that came down, and they just couldn't afford their bills, and they're like, look, it was $4,000 for a night. Like, I can't make that money anywhere else. Or I believe they were pre-med trying to get into med school.
Okay.
But still,
regardless.
but it's just one of those where they're typically going for people that need cash, need liquid cash. And what happens in our county that's particularly troublesome for us is they don't always get paid in cash. Sometimes they just give you the drugs.
Okay.
So if you're not a drug dealer, though,
Yeah.
and you get $2,500 worth of fentanyl, what are you doing? You're going to the first person you can find that'll give you some money
Yeah.
for it. So, but they're not going to give you $2,500 because they know you're desperate. Instead, they'll give you $1,000 cash. And you're like, well, it's better than walking around with 25. So now we're suddenly flooding our community with dirt cheap drugs.
Ugh.
And that's because of our intersection. That's what we're seeing. You can buy meth, or meth here is dirt cheap. Fentanyl's incredibly cheap. If you buy it in bulk, you can get it for less than 50 cents a pill.
Oh my God.
If you buy it just one off, you can usually get it for $3 a pill. Something right now is about the current going rate in our community.
When I had Matt Thomas on, and he raised a really good point. He said, he has kids. I have kids. You have kids. It's not of the time where you're scared of your kid going to a party and getting stupid and having a pill and then becoming addicted. Now it is going to a party, taking one pill and dying.
So I told you at least 60% of pills coming into the U.S. are coming through our deserts. We also know that 60% of every pill that we intercept has a lethal dosage of fentanyl in it, meaning if you've never taken it before and you don't have any tolerance, you're going to overdose and potentially die.
People don't understand how small of an amount. Like the misnomer has been that if you get on your fingers, you're going to die, stuff like that. No, it's ingestion. You touch it and then you touch your eye, you touch your nose, you touch your mouth. That's ingesting it. But it's just a few grains of salt.
Correct.
That equivalency of the fentanyl, the car fentanyl, or anything like that. What is this? Have we seen in Pinal County any of that new stuff that's coming across? I can't even think of the name. It's
Xylazine?
So new. I can't even think of the name.
Well, so there's a lot of things with it. Xylazine is what's known kind of on the street as trank, and it's the kind
Trank. That's what I've heard. Yes.
That's Xylazine.
Okay.
I will tell you that we actually just passed legislation this session, and the governor did sign it to actually outlaw Xylazine.
Okay.
It has a legitimate medical...
Was it a not a synthetic? I don't mean to cut you off. Is it a designer drug or is it an actual purpose?
It's
Like the
for
bath salts?
animals.
Oh.
It's a animal tranquilizer that has a very specific purpose. So we had to carve out in the state law saying, look, if you have it for legitimate purposes, if you are, if you do animal husbandry, if you have horses, if you're a vet, we're not trying to criminalize that. But what they're doing is they're taking this xylazine or trank, they're mixing it with fentanyl. So what it does is it just prolongs the impact.
Oh my God.
Yes.
None of that sounds fun.
And we are seeing some of it, not a lot.
Okay.
But what scares me is for the very first time, we're starting to see pure powdered fentanyl in our community.
No shit.
Before we were only seeing pills. Now we're actually seeing the pure powder. We just had a trial within maybe the last 2 or 3 months where he had bricks, plural bricks of 100% pure fentanyl.
So was he the maker then? Was he the one that was going to make it, or how does that get sold? How does that get distributed?
He is literally a middleman. I mean, they
Okay.
used a U.S. post office. Don't say that. And he was just getting it, and then he was shipping it back east, I believe, if I remember the details correctly.
But so
Somebody
we
else
had
was
the
doing
raw
it.
powder brought up.
But that's why my concern with xylazine is if we've got raw powder, they need to mix it with something.
Okay.
Typically, the pills that we see are mixed with like an acetaminophen, generic Tylenol. Grind it up, put a little blue dye in it, put a couple grains of fentanyl in it, stir it. You can buy a pill press off of Amazon right now, and you can manufacture it. So my concern is we're seeing it in powder form. Even as a pass-through, eventually these people are going to realize there's more money made making it here, which is why we wanted to make sure that we could control xylazine. Because otherwise, having packages of xylazine were not criminal. It was not criminalized at all. It was not a controlled substance that we could actually prosecute for.
This goes back to the old days of Sudafed. You could go and buy packs and packs and packs and packs and packs of Sudafed, and it wasn't illegal.
Yep.
But everybody knew what you were doing with it.
Yep.
So I'm very proud of the fact that my dad did 32 years with DPS and was on the task force and all that good stuff. And he was one of the ones that got it changed back in the day too. It used to be you had to have the precursor chemicals and the stuff to make it together, and
Yes.
you were criminalized. My dad was the one that got it changed to if you've got the precursor chemicals and I've got the stuff, we're both going to prison for making meth.
Yep.
So yeah, no, I grew up in the golden age of my dad running around Arizona busting all of the meth labs. So meth is not nearly as fatal. So and just this evolution that's happening with fentanyl is just it's crazy.
The labs were where the danger with meth was.
Yes,
Because
very
the flammable
true.
substance,
Yes.
and I mean, how many homes were condemned and all the different stuff. I mean, there were a few homes even in our community that blew up. So the danger was in actually the manufacturing process, not the end user. Not that I'm encouraging anybody to use meth or suggesting it's not serious, but the likelihood of you ODing on meth was pretty minimal.
Right.
It was making meth or obtaining it. That's where you were at risk. it's the end user here, which gets back to the kids issue. I mean, they take a pill, they have no idea what it is. They may think it's a Xanax. They may think it's something else. They think they're just going to go, chill out for a little while. I mean, shoot, we've even seen it mimicking like an Adderall or something. So you've got kids that are saying, hey, I've got a big test. I need to be able to focus. They're taking it thinking that they're going to get ready for a test, and it ends up being fentanyl. It ends up being an opioid. And some of these kids have literally one time they've used it, and their parents go to wake them up in the morning and they find their child passed out or deceased in their bed. I've met some of the parents, and it's devastating.
The child was not a drug addict. It is. I mean, that's the you get a lot of heartless people who have not understood the dynamics of what's going on and say, oh, they're just a drug addict, let them die. It's like, no, actually, that person wasn't. They thought they were they getting the Adderall for a good purpose? Meh, that's debatable. Right. But they were not seeking it to get high. They were actually trying to study, and then it was laced with something, and then this bullshit happened.
Yes. You know what I like to analogize it to people is, when we were kids, maybe it was a joint or maybe it was weed. Like, reality is the worst thing that was going to happen. Your parents are going to find out. You're going to get beat. At least for me, that's what was going to happen. Like, the only reason I didn't use is I was just afraid of my dad.
Yeah, I gotcha.
And healthy fears there, but that same sort of, it's really not that big of a deal. Like, I just hope my parents don't find out. Our kids having that same mindset are actually putting their lives at risk. I was never at risk of overdosing if I took a drag on a joint. I was never at risk of dying if I took a swig of my dad's Jack Daniels or something. But if you just pop one pill, there's a chance, and actually there's a really good chance if you have no tolerance that it's going to have a lethal dosage of fentanyl in that pill.
It's one of these things that I think about, like the DARE programs and the failed this and failed that, and how do we actually educate the people? It's like, we're not being hyperbolic here. We're not exaggerating. Like, I'm all about criminal justice reform. I'm all about drug policy reform. It's like, but this is not what was imagined. I will say this, because I think it's being used as a weapon against us by other countries. So I'll take that stance.
Right. There is one thing that I do want to be careful, though, and we don't need to demonize fentanyl. Fentanyl has a legitimate medical value.
1,000,000%.
So
1,000,000%.
I know I've had people who have come out of surgery and they've had a fentanyl patch, and they're like, oh, don't give me fentanyl. The difference between the fentanyl that the doctors are giving you are FDA regulated. We know the exact concentration. We know exactly how it's being made. The stuff that we're getting off the streets is being made typically in Mexico. The stuff that we have is being mixed. It's not the FDA standards and regulations. They're not doing random samplings to make sure that they know the exact quantity of every substance that's in there. So, I mean, if it's prescribed, it's legitimate.
Yes.
I mean, it was originally developed, my understanding is for people that were dying, hospice, at the end of life, to take that terrible pain away. So I'm in no way trying to demonize fentanyl. I mean, it has a legitimate medical purpose. It's just not for 16-year-olds to take on a Saturday night.
Amen. And everything that I talk about we'll get into the cannabis conversation in a minute, but it's like, if I'm talking about, using cannabis or using Vicodin or using those things, I'm not talking about using it in an irresponsible way. It's about if you're using it with intention and purpose and how it's prescribed, it's 100%. But the problem is, and we all know this, again, there's movies about it. We're not talking anything new here. The problem is the overprescription of the opioids, which led to everybody going to the streets. I remember back when I was in patrol back in 07, 08, 09, Gilbert was the heroin capital. It was black tar heroin.
Oh, really?
Yeah, all the rich kids. All the rich kids were getting the heroin. So it's overprescription from the opioids from doctors. Doctor's prescription runs out. Now this person needs their drug because now they're physically addicted and mentally addicted, and they're probably still in pain from whatever ails them.
Right.
Go to the streets to get the heroin, but now the heroin has turned to fentanyl, and the fentanyl is just killing people.
To take heroin, though, you've got to have your little bindle.
Yep.
You have to light it. You have to typically have a spoon or some, and then you have to have a needle.
Yep.
And needles are dirty. A lot of people don't want to take a needle and inject it into their arm. Fentanyl pill, you put it in that little pouch that you all have in your blue jeans that you never actually use. A couple pills, actually you can put 4 or 5, 10 pills in there. Put it in your jean pocket. Nobody will know. It doesn't look funny. You can drop it in an Altoid container. You can drop it with Tic Tacs. All of those places. There's a stigma associated with injecting drugs
100%
into your veins. Popping a pill is just really not that big of a deal. I mean, how often do you pop an ibuprofen or an aspirin because you got a headache? I mean, it's part of our culture.
Well, I don't, because I use cannabis, but everybody else, yes, I agree.
You get my point,
yes,
though.
100%.
So it also makes it more available, I think, to the masses. There is not that desire that's I don't want to touch that.
I've never thought about that before. just simply making it more tolerable and not stigmatized has just led to more and more addiction. And then the people who get addicted, it's just the vicious cycle. And then they get arrested, and then they're standing in front of you.
Then they're in the system. They're in the system, and our criminal justice system historically has been focused on punitive measures. We address addiction, we address mental health issues by essentially making the consequences so severe that we dissuade people from continuing down that path.
Does that work?
No, not even kind of. Not if it's genuine mental health and genuine addiction issues. You had mentioned it. There's physical addiction. There's you're mentally addicted to it. The way it makes you feel. You're oftentimes using because there's something going on there.
Yes.
There's underlying trauma. There's issues. I'm not one of these people that believes that we can just hug everybody into compliance. I don't believe without any consequence we're ever going to get people where they need to be. There needs to be personal accountability.
Amen.
But on the other hand, I also don't think we should just ignore how people got to that point. It's when you're dealing with drugs, you need to deal with the supply end and the demand end, not one or the other. When we're dealing with addiction, we need to deal with what's caused the addiction, and then how can we help them get out of it. Again, you have to attack it on both ends, or we're going to be where we're at. And that's 60, almost 70 years into the war on drugs. We've not been very successful.
No, not at all. And that is the one thing that you can sit here and people can hammer down on the flow of drugs coming in, but that's always my question. You still have addicts that are out there. They're still going to find something to get high on, whether it's paint or whatever the case is, because they're not dealing with the underlying addiction. And I think maybe you'll agree with this. Probably a big round number here. Probably 80% of the crimes that come across your desk are because people have unresolved trauma in their childhood, which led them down the wrong path.
What I can tell you is 85% involve sale, transportation, or possession, transportation, or sale of drugs.
Okay.
Under the influence of drugs or alcohol when they committed the offense, felony DUI, or they were committing the offense in furtherance of dealing with their underlying addiction. That's 85%. I mean, again, it's very anecdotal, but 85% tie back to substance use and abuse. So we know 85% of our crime ties back to there. And I would venture to say that the vast majority, probably higher than your 80% of people that are dealing with those issues, have some sort of unresolved trauma that they're not dealing with. So I would actually tell you it may even be a little bit higher than that.
So we have a mental health crisis in our country.
So if you haven't figured out, I'm kind of a data nerd. I no problems with that. I got an MBA in finance. I love the numbers. I can tell you in 1955, the population of the United States was 165 million. Our prison rate was 0.001% of our population was incarcerated in some fashion. There are over 500,000 inpatient psychiatric bed facilities. If you fast forward to 2020, our population's doubled. We're now at 331 million. Went from 165 to 331 million. Our prison rate went from 0.001 to 0.007.
Okay.
So it's a 7 times increase, but because our population's increased, it's really a 14 times increase of the people that are in prison.
Valid point.
The number.
Gotcha.
And our inpatient psychiatric beds are now below 35,000. It was 500,000 in 1955. We now have less than 35,000 nationwide. So that's a 93% reduction in inpatient beds when our population is doubled. So we're putting those people in prison. That's what's happening is we're throwing them in our jails, we're throwing them in our prisons, and not giving them the mental health treatment they need. Instead, we're giving them severe consequences that aren't addressing the underlying issue.
Why the reduction in beds, and what would it take? And were they effective? Why the reduction? Were they effective? And would they be effective if they came back? Sorry, I didn't mean to throw all those out at the same time, but regarding the mental health status.
So before we got on, we talked, we're of the same age.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember, gosh, it's probably 25 years ago now, there was a show with Jimmy Kimmel and Adam Carolla and Dr. Drew Pinsky.
Yeah.
A lot of times it was
Loveline.
Loveline, that's it, yes.
Loveline, of course.
So I was at a seminar in which Dr. Drew was presenting in Austin, Texas. I believe it was last summer. And he kind of talked about this very intentional elimination of inpatient psychiatric beds.
Okay.
And it was quite fascinating. He talked about sort of the origins, but according to the presentation I heard, and maybe Dr. Drew will listen to this and he'll correct me if I'm wrong, this is my recollection of it, it really started with Kennedy. So JFK, if you don't know, when his mother was dying, they asked his mother, what was the greatest tragedy that ever befell your family? When she was dying. So JFK had been assassinated.
Mm-hmm.
RFK, who's going to be the president, was assassinated.
Mm-hmm.
And she said it was what happened to their daughter. And the biographer is like, your daughter. And I apologize, I don't remember the daughter's name, but she had severe mental health issues.
Okay.
She was institutionalized, and ultimately she was lobotomized. And as relayed to me, as I recall, JFK's mom said, we did that. That wasn't somebody else. That wasn't some evil that did that. That wasn't somebody that killed our family. That was something that we did.
Yeah.
And that's the greatest tragedy that ever befell us. So JFK came up realizing, seeing this, and there was a group of the National Institute of Health saying, look, these mental health institutions, they're just not working.
Okay.
People don't get better. Look at your sister. This is nothing better than a prison, and they don't work. So you've got this push, and JFK appointed somebody to the National Institute of Mental Health who was not supportive of it. There's only been a few directors, and it gets all the way to Reagan. So this isn't a D versus R.
Gotcha.
And Reagan was the last one who kind of said, yeah, we need to get rid of these, it used to be called asylums, insane asylums, or loony bins, and there were all these sort of pejorative terms. I grew up, you called them quacks. Like, you didn't go they were quacks.
Yes.
You don't go talk to a psychiatrist or a psychologist. They're quacks.
Shrink.
Avoid them. Yes.
Yeah.
Very, very negative. So what happens is there was just this sort of public conscience, or conscious, I guess, saying, we don't want this. And I am certainly not saying what we did in 1955 was appropriate. A man could institutionalize his wife because he was the man. There were not adequate and sufficient civil rights safeguards put in place. But what I've personally experienced from my childhood into my adulthood to where I'm at now is I've seen an increase in mental health issues, not a decrease in mental health issues. Yet we still have less beds available to assist people. And I'm not saying we need to lock them up for 30 or 40 years, but what I'm saying is if we can get people there for 30 or 60 or 90 or 180 days, we probably have a better chance. Again, this is what Dr. Drew said, and it struck a chord with me. He said, you're not going to be able to undo in a week or 30 days what 15 years of addiction has done to somebody. It just doesn't work that way. He's like, I don't need 15 years, but I need more than 30 days.
Or a 72-hour psych hold.
Exactly. So I believe, right now we put too many people in prison collectively. In our county, we try and do as good of a job as possible, but we need to start having more psychiatric beds. We need to be able to get people stable because a lot of these people, they want help. They truly do. Some of them need a little help, but there's almost always families that want these people to have help. And our solution has just been, we'll throw them in prison. And prison's going to be so terrible that they're going to come out and get help on their own. It just doesn't work.
They get more drugs in prison. They can continue their addiction in prison. Like, all of these are knowns. And again, it's no reflection on anything. It's just the reality of what it is. The problem to me, though, is what does good mental health services look like? I just saw, it's online talking about how this generation that's coming up right now has the most help regarding mental health and is having the worst outcomes regarding mental health. And again, that's just going to compound and that's going to spiral. And what I used to say when I was in law enforcement, when I would deal with those people that had you're like, what is going on here? It's because people snap and have just that one bad day because of all of the stuff that's compounded in their life, and they're having terrible mental health. So what does good mental health look like? I don't know. I'm not an expert in that.
I agree with you. That's far outside of my expertise.
I don't know.
What I can do is I can just sit back and look and say, we've been doing the same thing now for 60 or 70 years. We see the increase in the use of prison as a tool.
Yeah.
I will say we've gotten safer, but I would ask, what's been the human cost? What's been the human toll? You asked me, the very first question is, how did I get here? And I talked about sort of that generational that we were seeing. That's what we've seen is generational. Unfortunately, there are kids that we see now that I can tell you when I look at them, if there is not severe intervention in their life, I'm going to see them and they're going to do the life installment plan in our Arizona Department of Corrections. And I don't have the solution for it. But we're so afraid to have the conversation. And I don't know that there's going to be one person. It's not going to be you. It's not going to be me. There's not going to be one person. But collectively, we have to have the communication. the conversation. We have to have a community that comes together and starts saying, this is something that we're going to prioritize. You know what? Sometimes we're wrong. Sometimes we try and do something and say, hey, we think this is going to work, and it doesn't. But we're so daggone proud that we'll never admit that this wasn't the right way to go.
Just keep doubling down on the bad.
Yes.
Just keep hammering and hammering and hammering.
You know, if you
It's
play
like, it's not working.
blackjack, eventually you have to win. If you keep doubling your bet, you get break to even. That's the way it works.
You lost $10,000, but at the same time, you might hit $500. Yeah, that's an interesting way to look at it, though, is that if we just keep doubling down, because people, one, they don't want to admit they're wrong. They don't want to take that humble approach and say, how can we do this as a community? I really respect that. And when the first time I'd met you, we just had a very short conversation about kind of your philosophy also. And please stop me and interject when I go wrong here. But basically, you were saying, like, is this person a dangerous criminal, or did this person have a bad day? And it's the sort of thing where we need to get back to the point of, like, if this person's a dangerous criminal, why are they a dangerous criminal? Where did they go wrong? If this person's having a bad day, let's not demonize them. Let's not criminalize them. Let's not do anything like that. You know, let's get them as a member of society.
That segues very well kind of into our diversion program. So Pinal County before me had a diversion program, but the diversion program was pay to play.
Okay.
Essentially, if you pay $500, you go sit on the class on a Saturday, we dismiss your charges.
Interesting.
The idea was, hey, you had a bad day. There needs to be some consequences. Let's move on. It took us a couple years to get there, but our diversion program is very different. Our diversion program, we do a literal battery of assessments. We do addiction testing. We actually look at your ACEs score. We do all kinds of risk assessments.
Okay.
ORAS, I know is one of them. There's there's brief addiction monitor. There's ORAS. There's like 7 or 8 different assessments that we do. And then our plan, though, is not, hey, I see that you got caught with drugs, so this is what we're going to have you do. Go attend 10 joint or group sessions for drug use, be clean 10 times, and do this, and we'll dismiss charges. Instead, we do these battery of assessments. We give you the results, and we have you go to a professional.
Okay.
And it's a professional of your choosing. And they actually develop a plan and say, hey, what's wrong?
Okay.
Why is this person in the system? What caused them to come into the system? Again, it may be a drug charge, but there may be an underlying mental health issue.
Yeah.
Or, it may be an anger management issue, or it may be a gazillion different things that are going on, or, it may just be they had a really bad day. But we allow that professional, and then what they have to do to graduate our program is just complete the plan that they develop in conjunction with their providers. Once you complete it, charges are dismissed in their entirety. What we know is if we get you through our diversion program and you complete it, it's less than 2% of people that come back in the criminal justice system.
That's a staggering number. And that's reflects very good on you, and reflects very good on your office.
My team. Not so much me, my team.
But the policies that you've implemented, and you're the head of it. So it's, everything if it goes good, it falls under you. If it goes bad, it falls under you as well. But yeah, no, that's very innovative. And that's actually one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you, is because since my law enforcement days, I've absolutely shifted. And the thing I was debating on having this conversation with you or not, I'm just going to bring it up briefly, but the only way I would ever have any credibility, and we had this conversation on the road, but I'm doing this for the listeners and all that good stuff, is I've been a member of, a resident of the Pinal County jail system while I was a police officer, which is one of the things that led to my demise in law enforcement, plus my back injury. But it was the sort of thing where I've been through the system. I've been through the Pinal County system. I've done all that. All charges dropped, no charges, we're good. But it was the sort of thing where I was treated very fairly. And it was seen as I had a bad day. I wasn't seen as a criminal. I wasn't seen as anything else, but I had a bad day. I made a bad decision. I did something stupid. Yes, it affected me in the moment. What I realize now is that it's absolutely the best thing that ever could have happened in my life, because it got me on the right track. It got me down the right track of looking at my relationship with alcohol, looking at my relationship with my family, looking at my relationship with my work back then. But it got me back on the straight and narrow. Now, yes, there absolutely were repercussions for what I did and where it's led to me to now, but that's part of the thing about the reform and getting people, like, not just criminalizing me for the rest of my life because I made one bad decision. So
when I talk about diversion, what you tend to see is Younger people seem to be very understanding and accepting of it. They're like, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. What you tend to see is a older, more conservative crowd think, this sounds like this sort of woke, progressive, hug a thug kind of BS. The way that I can usually break through that sort of facade is tell people, think of the dumbest decision you've ever made in your life. Whatever it was, whether you were 18 or 21 or 40 or 65
or 35.
Yes, whatever. And imagine that a uniformed police officer was there when you made that decision. Does it make sense that I brand you with a scarlet F for the rest of your life? I inhibit your ability to care for your family, to have a good job, to be a member of our community, and instead I'm going to take everything from you and throw you in jail or throw you in prison? Like it just doesn't make sense. And even if you're not there, think about your grandson, think about your son, think about 99.9% of the time they're great, and they had that one blip in time.
Yep.
What our diversion program, when we're looking for that, it's that blip. That's what we're trying to. You were much kinder. I usually say, are they dangerous or was it dumb? Because we've all done dumb things.
Absolutely.
Quite frankly, if law enforcement had made me watch my worst decisions, I wouldn't be here.
Right.
That's the reality. But for the grace of God, there go I. And I think it's criminal justice system. There has to be mercy in it. We have criminalized everything. In 1912, when Arizona became a state, our Arizona Revised Statute criminal code was this big.
Okay.
The criminal code now is, last check, this big. I don't even print it off anymore because it's so big with all the pocket parts. We've criminalized a lot of actions, and we don't always do a good job distinguishing between. And if you have a prosecutor who believes that the answer is always to maximize punishment, boy, I think all of our heads are going to be on the chopping block. Instead, we need to look at individualized justice. We need to look at the person. We need to look at what happened. We need to look at the risk that they pose to our community and how that crime actually impacted the fabric of our society. And that's where you go. Again, is this a dangerous person? Because we have to treat them a little bit different than somebody that did something stupid.
Well, we have to accept the fact that there are 100% dangerous people that do not belong to be walking out amongst us. How they got there, we could have that conversation later. But at the same time, they are dangerous, whether it's to children, whether it's to other adults, whether the case is. But those people do, in fact, exist. They're predators out there amongst us. And that is where we need, a personal opinion, the heavy hand of the law and the heavy hand of law enforcement and the heavy hand of the prosecutor's office to say, you are too dangerous to be out there.
Preach it, brother. Preach it.
And it's just like, okay, let's work on a rehab program for them when they're inside and locked away and not hurting anybody. But we cannot turn a blind eye to hug a thug or anything like that.
And that's, I think it's really important where I distinguish what the Pinal County Attorney's Office does compared to like maybe a George Gascon that's in LA or a Kim Fox that's in Chicago or a Kim Ott in Houston, and you typically see in your major metropolitan areas. There's just entire classes of offenses that they're just choosing not to prosecute. And they're just saying, for whatever reason, and most of the time, some of their logic makes sense. They're saying, look, there's over-policing in this area, and if we over-police anybody, we're going to catch them. And they've had this terrible childhood growing up, and they've had limited access. I'm not saying all of that stuff isn't at some point relevant, but they're saying, so we're just going to forgive all crimes. We're looking at the person, not the offense.
Okay.
And that's where our focus is at.
That's very human. That brings the human side of the element into it.
But we are humans.
Right.
And that's what our responsibility is. Look, I'll tell you, you said there's good things about our county. One of the greatest things about our county is I have a board of supervisors who trust me and properly funds our office. I give them my vision, and I tell them, quite frankly, it's more expensive up front to run things this way because I have to have prosecutors that look at every individual case and to talk with our law enforcement, and it is not somebody in a dark room who's just making all these decisions. Instead, they're individually looking at cases.
Okay.
And that takes time. But what we can show is we've shown a reduction in crime in our community. What we can show is the people that we put on probation are having a better likelihood and better results. So it is a little more expensive up front, but in the back end, it's much less expensive, particularly when you think about the negative consequences of people going to prison. So I didn't more numbers for you just because I love them. If you go to prison within 3 years, 68% will be rearrested for a new offense.
Okay.
Within 6 years, it's 79%.
Okay.
Within 9 years, it's 83%. That means 5 out of every 6 people that we put in prison will be rearrested for a new offense within 9 years of being released. We do not rehabilitate in there.
No.
And the other thing we know is if you have children and you're in prison, your children are less likely to graduate from high school. They're more likely to use drugs. They're less likely to be law-abiding citizens. So what we know is they're also more likely to enter into the criminal justice system. So we know that when we put somebody in prison, it has all of these other ancillary impacts. And if you are just saying, I'm going to punish, I'm going to punish, I'm going to punish, you're not looking at the overall perspective. You're not looking at, hey, what is the overall impact to our community? What is the human impact to our community? Because quite frankly, we as taxpayers, again, we talked about this earlier. I'm a Republican. I'm not a social conservative. I'm a fiscal conservative.
Amen.
Every dollar I spend, I have to account for. You should be able to say, why did you spend this money? And if I can't, then I didn't do a good job with it. I have a moral and a fiduciary responsibility as an elected official to use your money wisely. We have not always done that in the criminal justice system. In fact, throwing people in prison, $35,000 a year. Putting them on probation, about $2,000. So if I can safely put you on probation, that's what we should be doing, because then you can get a job. You can be a productive member of society. I don't have to, as a taxpayer, have to subsidize the care for your children. I don't have to pay for all these. I don't have to pay for you in prison. I don't have to pay for your kids. I don't have to pay for all these other things. Instead, you have the opportunity to work. That's all we want is compliance. And that's, again, you're right. That's a human perspective.
Amen.
But what it's not is it's not a liberal progressive perspective. Actually, I would tell you it's a very conservative perspective, because at the end of the day, it's financially responsible to do it this way.
Yeah, it's saving everybody money. It's also generating more revenue for the government, because they'll be back out there working and spending money and paying their taxes.
Correct.
Hopefully paying their taxes.
Hopefully.
Not a big fan right now of the tax issues, but anyways. But that gets people, there's all of this rhetoric and bullshit talk out there in society and everything. It's like, I believe in having a nuclear family at home, and I believe in having, and again, I'm exactly the same way as you. I'm fiscally conservative. I'm socially progressive. We talked about it before. Don't touch children. Don't hurt children. Do whatever the F you want. Wear what you want, be what you want, do all that good stuff. But at the same time, we do have a responsibility to law and order. We do have a responsibility to, keeping society moving forward in a way that things are funded, because you're going to have criminals. And I mean criminals in the sense of like the bad people we talked about before that we're going to have to deal with.
Look, government is here primarily to keep you safe. I mean, at the end of the day, everything we do should be designed around public safety, whether it's taking taxes so we can build roads, funding my office, funding the sheriff's office, or anybody else. It is essentially, at least from my perspective, its primary obligation to you is to keep you safe, to not have to worry that you're going to get robbed by somebody, that you're going to get beat up by somebody, that somebody's going to come into your house and take stuff because they're bigger and stronger than you. And if we don't have laws to protect us, then it becomes, survival of the fittest. And I got a bad back like you. I'm a big guy, but I'm in trouble when it comes to that. If I take my glasses off, I'm legally blind. Somebody takes my glasses, I'm in trouble. I mean, our government really needs to be focusing on public safety. And I think we've gotten away as a government, and this is a little outside of here, but I think we've gotten away from that core mission, and we start trying to regulate behavior. We try and regulate stuff that we really don't need to. If it doesn't involve public safety, my position is let it go.
I'm becoming more and more libertarian in my old age. Like, can I just leave me alone?
Yes.
I'm not hurting anybody. They're not hurting me. Leave me alone. But at the same time, you have those that want to rule and, and govern everybody's. I'm very, very scared of the ruling that just came down. And again, we're getting a little sidetracked here, but we'll go right on track. Regarding free speech that just happened in the House yesterday at the federal level. I'm a free speech absolutist, and I believe that people should be able to think and say whatever disgusting, vile thoughts that they want to, that unless it's an actionable thing,
right?
These people should die is not the same as saying kill that person. You can have your disgusting, immoral, disgusting thoughts, and I'm allowed to have whatever thoughts I want to have, but I don't think you should be suppressed, and I don't think I should be suppressed. That's on a personal opinion here.
The danger is if your party's not the one in power,
right,
then you're in trouble.
Yep.
I agree with you. I find a lot of the behavior, I shouldn't say the behavior, I find a lot of the commentary personally offensible and reprehensible. But you know what? We have a Constitution of the United States that guarantees your right to have that and to say that.
Amen.
It's different than fire in a crowded, movie theater.
Right.
That's different because you're putting people's immediate lives in danger. But I agree with you. I think it is very short-sighted. I think it is very scary because what's going to happen? Is the government now going to tell us what we can and can't say?
That's what's going to happen.
That terrifies me.
Yeah, and the terms like, that's hate speech. Well, your definition and my definition of hate speech, I'm not offended by anything. I don't give a shit what you say. I don't consider anything hate speech because, again, I'm not offended. But yeah, no, it goes down a very slippery slope. Yeah, I know, getting a little off topic here.
No,
but
that's the reality. It's my position is sort of unique in though that these conversations are sort of relevant because at the end of the day, I'm also the advisors to our board of supervisors who sets the rules and effectively has some lawmaking authority for our county when we set our county code and everything else. So I think knowing my personal thoughts on these type of issues is somewhat relevant because at the end of the day, you want to know who is in the ear of your other electeds that are making these decisions because our conversations aren't public. Our conversations are private. They're protected by attorney-client privilege. So while it's maybe not relevant to this very specific podcast, it's certainly relevant to the Pinal County Attorney's Office, the positions that I hold and how I feel about these things. And you may not agree with me. It's perfectly fine, but that's why free speech is so important.
yes,
I'm also a firm believer in steel sharpens steel because
absolutely.
I'm admitting to a lot of people here, but I've been wrong before. I've had an opinion and I've listened and I've been called to the carpet or I've heard people tell me stuff and I thought, you know what? I was wrong.
Right.
You were right. If they're not allowed to have that conversation, I can never evolve as a human being. I can never become a better person because I can never get called on the carpet or I can never be forced to have those tough conversations or to defend some positions that I had. This is kind of getting far afield, but I was a young man when 9/11 occurred. I immediately assumed all Muslims were evil and I wanted them all to die because I saw my fellow countrymen die there. Yeah. And I wouldn't say hatred, but I had a lot of anger and it was misplaced. And it wasn't until I was called out like, look, you're letting a very small minority. Right. And they went back and, they used all kinds of different analogies throughout the country. And I was wrong. Again, you can hate some of the stuff that happened. You can hate the actions, but to hate an entire class of people, had we not been able to have that conversation, who knows where I would be.
I sit there and I think about the fact of like what's going on in the world and this group hates that group and this group hates that group. And I'm sitting here saying like, but I bet you at the end of the day, that guy goes home to his family and just wants to be the best dad and husband to his kids and family. And the same with this group. And it's like, if we would just shut up and just realize that we're all just human beings trying to do and manage the best that we can and not screw up and not break the law and just live our lives and all that good stuff, we can come to an understanding.
Let's also not criminalize all behavior.
Let's not criminalize all behavior, please. I do want to discuss with you, because I have an attorney for a county in Arizona sitting in front of me, cannabis and all of its glory and all of its stuff that's going on, especially in Arizona. And again, we're hot off the heels of the DEA announcing that they are considering, everybody thinks they reclassified it. They did not. They did not yet.
Right.
They're considering rescheduling, from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, the implication that's going on, and then also guns and cannabis. That is a big talking point. So as we talked earlier, I just took over the state directorship. I was voted in by my board for Arizona Normal. So I'm the director for that. So these are very, very relevant conversations regarding what's going on in the world and all of the stuff at the Capitol, because it's just an ongoing fight. So I did want to discuss with you cannabis. Like I said, we had a short conversation about it. And you brought up some really, really interesting things that I had not thought of or even heard of. So with that being said, I like cannabis. And I'm former law enforcement.
In full disclosure, I've never used.
Okay.
Never once in my life. Not because I'm a moralist, but I was the kid that if ever I did anything wrong, I'd get caught.
You see, that's the funny thing is I'm the exact same way. I was, if you and I did the same things, and I was the one that was going to get caught.
Right.
Every single time. I get it. I get it.
I also have an addictive personality.
Okay.
So I've always been concerned. Like even when I have legitimate pain, I'm very cognizant of how many pills I've taken, how much time I've taken it, because I have a tendency to become very quickly addicted to stuff. Like, just recently I stopped smoking cigars for a while.
Okay.
I've had a couple cigars and like, man, I really want a cigar tonight. Like I have this sort of natural genetic predisposition. So I've stayed away from it just because if I don't need it, I'm not going to tempt the devil, so to speak.
What you just said, though, has been the revolving theme regarding cannabis, particularly with people who are conservative. I used cannabis back in high school a couple times, no big deal. Wasn't like, whatever. Obviously did not touch it in my military career, did not touch it in my time in law enforcement other than chasing bad guys for it. It was not until I needed cannabis. When my back exploded in November 2017, and it was absolute emergency. Nothing was giving me relief. I was literally starting to lose bladder control because how the disc was pushing on the nerves and all that good stuff. And I was in like extreme pain, and aspirin wasn't working. I've told this story before. I have a stoner brother who's been a pothead for 25 years, 30 years. And I called up a family member and says, hey, I've heard this works for pain. They brought me over some and immediately had, and again, I was out of law enforcement by this time,
Right.
immediately had a 50% reduction. And I was in pain. And I was like, holy shit. So that's what kind of started my path down that. And the reason why I started this podcast, and I still have a love for law enforcement and I still have a love for the cannabis community, is because my heart is always with first responders. But at the same time, and I mean this when I say this, cannabis saved my life. It saved my life regarding my mental health. It saved my life regarding addiction to alcohol. It saved my life regarding pain. Right. So I've had 2 back surgeries. I still have herniated discs. I still have pain sitting here. My foot is numb and all that fun stuff. So I started using cannabis with an intention and purpose of wanting to not be addicted to opioids, because I used that shit. I was given that stuff and it was terrible. And I could not even imagine people who take those on a daily basis for the rest of their life because they're in such pain. Right. There are people who need it. Again, there was an absolute legitimate cause for it and a reason for it, but I could not imagine being in that state of mind as an opioid user for pain instead of being able to live the productive life I live. But I just so happen to use a medicine that's really, really stigmatized still. It's very... I have conversations with conservatives. I have conversations with diehard Republicans. Democrats don't give a shit for the most part when it comes to cannabis. They really, really don't. Right. Especially at the Arizona state legislature and all that good stuff. They're like, whatever, just pass it. We don't care. Obviously regulations and all that. But I talk to so many conservatives and they're like going, I use gummies at night. It's like, you don't have to whisper. Yes. It's okay. Right. And they're like, my girlfriends and I, we'll get together and have our wine and we'll smoke a joint. It's like, it's okay. But we have not reached the point yet where A, it's accepted, understood, researched, still stigmatized, and also often misunderstood, if that makes sense.
I agree with you. And you kind of, when we transitioned into this conversation, you were talking about, the DEA considering rescheduling. And right. The reality is it's still federally unlawful. Yes. And as long as you have that hanging over the head, that stigma is never going to go away. I will tell you, my belief, again, I skew a little libertarian on a number of issues. I don't think the rescheduling makes sense. Quite frankly, I think the federal government should repeal it and leave it up to the individual states. Now, I would give the states the authority. If a state wants to say we're going to make it illegal, I think that's up to the state and the people of that individual state. I think the government should butt out. There should never be a time where a state says you're illegally allowed to do this and the federal government says you're not. Right. And we have a federal government right now who's essentially saying, yeah, it's technically illegal, but we're not going to enforce that law. That undermines the very law itself. I think that is a terrible issue. It's a terrible look. Yep. So I think the rescheduling, you just need to rip the Band-Aid off. Yep. And let the individual states make those determinations for the people of that state. That's the position that I take. I'll be candid. I'm neither pro-cannabis or anti-cannabis. I'm gonna let people make their own decision. I would like a little more regulation that maybe we can get into. Oh, sure. But at the end of the day, I don't think the federal government should be playing in this pool.
I completely agree. It's like, I'm not one of these people that says that law is racist. But going back to, I know everything before the but is irrelevant, but learning and understanding the reason why it was actually criminalized is absolutely rooted in racism.
Reefer madness.
Yes.
And yes.
It was the Mexican immigrants are bringing their wacky tobacco over. And I mean, it used to be said that black people are going to smoke marijuana. Black men are going to smoke marijuana and then go after the white women.
Rape the white women.
Rape the white women.
Yes.
Like, so these sorts of things are in fact inherently rooted in racism.
Yes.
When I talk about my experiences as a cop, though, when I was enforcing cannabis law, it was not rooted in racism. My enforcement of that was not rooted in racism. Again, my understanding of it was different back then, but it was, I pull you over, you smell like weed. Sorry, right. You're under arrest.
Your creed, your ethnicity, the color of your skin, completely irrelevant. Is there weed there? Is there not? Yes.
Right. And it is the sort of thing where like the history of it is, but we've got to move forward and we have to evolve. Right. And we have to take a look at the damage that has occurred, not culturally, but what's what I'm looking for here, but generationally. for years and years
Right.
and years. And I had the Last Prisoner Project on, and we were talking about, like, is there a difference between the black community and the white community in the amount of usage? And the usage is the same across the board. So that's the statistics that they gave me. But for some reason, the black community has been more marginalized regarding cannabis use, regarding charging. And again, it goes back to the old days of crack cocaine. You're doing 12 years. Powder cocaine at the club on Friday night in Miami, that's okay. Black community, white community. Unfortunately, we have to talk about these things. Like, it does happen.
My only pushback is I don't think it's quite as black and white. I think it's poor and wealthy.
Okay.
So that's been my beef for a long time, is we want to go back into these sort of tropes that it's racially based. I really believe the bottom line is money. When we look at disproportionately being policed, it's not necessarily black communities, it's poor communities. Now, our minorities tend to make up a greater proportion of those in the socioeconomically disadvantaged places. But that's a pushback.
Okay.
The criminal justice system, I don't think is racist. And let me give you the example that I like to give people because it's just tangible. You can understand it. So if a person comes up and they say, hey, this is the second time I've been caught with methamphetamine we'll use, and it's a no agreements offer, so the court can put them in prison or the court can put them in jail.
Okay.
Or maybe it's the third time, so they can do one or the other. The court, is going to say, well, why should I not put you in prison? So if this person can talk about how they've got family support, how they've got a job lined up, how they've got inpatient treatment that they're going to go into, they've got outpatient treatment when it's there, they've got all of those probation services and everything going on, the court's probably going to look at that person and say, yeah, we're going to give you a shot.
You're not a huge risk.
Right.
You have support.
But if the other person comes up and they are still in jail because they couldn't post bond, they don't have a private attorney that was able to get all of this work, and I'm not denigrating the public defender's office whatsoever, but they've not paid somebody tens of thousands of dollars who was getting all of these old records. They don't have letters from the mayor. They don't have all of these things in place. The court's going to say, why do we think that it's going to be any different this time than it was last time? And that person's more likely to go to prison. That has nothing to do with the color of your skin. It has to do with how much money you have and how much access you have to the social support services you need to be successful. And I think that's what we've historically have seen. So what you're saying, you're not wrong, but I think it's a little bit more nuanced, and I always like to kind of point that out because at the end of the day, if you have access to money, you have access to arguably a little different slice of the criminal justice pie that nobody else does.
And we're not denigrating. I'm not denigrating the public defender's office in any way, shape, or form. The reality is, though, they're overworked, they're underpaid, they're seeing a million, subjects a day. And they don't have the time to subpoena records, to go out and grab all this good stuff. And it does do a disservice to people who are defending, who need good defense, unfortunately. But again, it's not because they're lazy or whatever the case is. They're running out of F's to give, I'm sure, the public defenders. But at the same time, though, it's like they need more resources as well.
They do, and I will tell you, Pinal County does a good job. So a plug for Pinal County. I can tell you, Kate Maluski is our public defender. She does a great job. The county actually hired a public defense services director to make sure that services are there. And if there
I
are
would
issues,
love to talk to her.
She's great.
I would love to talk to her.
I would be shocked if, she would probably have to get permission because she's
Totally
not elected,
understood.
so she has to answer to bosses.
Understood.
But my guess is she'd be willing to come chat with
Cool.
you. She was actually a prosecutor for the first probably, 15 or so years of her career. So when we first started in this county, she was the prosecutor and I was the defense attorney.
Oh, cool.
Now fast forward 20 years later and we flipped.
The one thing I will say is that my experience I'm friends with public defenders. My experience when I was in law enforcement, the way that I looked at it, sidetracking real quick, it was not us versus them. I looked at it as I got my ass whooped by a fantastic not public defender, just defense attorney, and taking public defense into it as well. I got my ass handed to me. And again, not necessarily to me, but the prosecutor did as well.
Right.
And I went out to lunch with that defense attorney and learned and understood the role. Their role was to poke holes in me as a police officer and to make me do my job better. I don't want to segue off of the cannabis stuff, but I do want to talk about holding officers, doing their jobs to the best of their abilities within the confines of the Constitution to give to you, the prosecutor, a solid case so that the bad guys can be prosecuted. So I do want to transition to that, but I wanted to continue on the cannabis for just a few minutes because I've got questions.
Fire away.
I've got clarifying questions.
You may not always like my answer, but I'll do my best to be as honest as I can.
But the same thing, at the same time, though, is that your answers are relevant and need to be answered. You know what I mean? And nobody's having these conversations.
Right.
So that's one thing I do take pride in, is like nobody's having these conversations and trying to find the information. But like when it comes to cannabis, and DUIs and stuff like that, like there's so much research that needs to be had. When recreational and medical became legal, did you guys notice? Well, medical would have been before your tenure, correct? But the recreational, are you seeing an uptick in the amount of DUIs involving cannabis?
We are.
Okay.
We are seeing. There's been a transition, really. So this is my 8th year in office.
Okay.
Really, when I first came in, it was about a 50-50 split between alcohol and non-alcohol DUIs. It is now clearly no longer alcohol primary DUIs.
Really? Mm-hmm. So is it primarily cannabis then, or other than drugs, other than alcohol?
It's other than, believe it or not, we get a lot of prescription DUIs.
I'm sure.
The opioids we talked about. When you look on the side of the bottle and it says, don't operate heavy machinery, well, your vehicle's heavy machinery. We'll see it with like an Ambien or Xanax or some of these other things. Ambien's designed to make you go to sleep. So if you take a pill that's designed to make you go to sleep for 8 hours and you wake up 5 hours or 6 hours later and you're driving, it's still in your system.
Yeah.
You're potentially under the influence. And you fall asleep when you're driving and you hit somebody, you were under the influence of the drug. It was doing what it was supposed to. It was making you tired. So we don't break it out as, cannabis and everything else. It's just alcohol or non-alcohol.
Okay.
And we're actually seeing more non-alcohol now. And every year it seems to be more and more. It seems to be distancing itself. I mean, it's still maybe like a 55-45, maybe no more than a 60-40 split, but we are seeing more there. But we are seeing more cannabis related, and we are seeing that in almost every fatal accident that we're reviewing, that there is what we call on board. There's something on board, whether it's alcohol, whether it's cannabis prescription, but in the vast majority of fatal accidents, there are something that's on board.
The question that has been posed, and I've often thought about too, is like, it is understood from the scientific community, the law enforcement community, and even defense attorneys, at 0.08% blood alcohol concentration, you are presumed to be under the influence. Whether you're presenting as under the influence or not is irrelevant.
Correct.
If you blow that 0.08 or your blood comes back at over the 0.08, you are impaired. That's what it is. Yep. The hard part with cannabis has been, what does 12 nanograms per milliliter in your blood mean?
Nothing.
What does 100 nanograms per milliliter in your blood mean? Nothing. And I'm very happy that there's no per se limit. I'm very, very happy. Like I said, it is odd to say, like, you're sitting in a room and there's cannabis within 3 feet of you and I'm totally within state law. And I am a daily user because of my back pain. So I'm going to consistently have some amount in my blood.
Right.
Am I presenting as under the influence right now? Probably not.
Certainly not.
So it's one of these things where it's like, what does that mean? Which is where we need the testing, which is where we need, and I'm also not so certain on like this is something where my mind has shifted regarding the roadside field sobriety tests and all that. We all know what an impaired person looks like under anything. It doesn't matter. There's impairment there.
Right.
But it's one of those things where we need just so much better testing. And how do we, the medical patients are scared. And
right.
I've always been an advocate for the medical patients to continue to keep your medical card. To me, it personally validates. I'll say, like, if you are a recreational user, I don't care. But my love and my passion in the cannabis community is definitely for the medicinal patients who are leading better qualities of life because of the use of cannabis. So for the medical patients who are using, on a daily basis,
right,
it's a scary proposition I smoked a joint like 5 hours ago. Am I okay to drive? Oh, my car. I don't smoke in your car. Don't drive under the influence. Don't smoke in your car. Don't drive under the influence. I think you would agree, right?
Yes, please,
Yes.
please.
But for those people, like I said, you smoked in the morning, you woke up, you stayed at your house for a few hours. Now you got to go drive somewhere. And that's a scary proposition.
I don't know that we're ever going to be able to get to the 0.08. The federal government makes it impossible right now because we can't do the testing that's necessary. But I don't know if we're ever going to get there because you really get into tolerance and some of those other type levels. My guess is if we ever get to a number, it's going to be so high that it's going to make a lot of people uncomfortable.
Okay.
Pun not intended, sorry. But that the ratio would be so significant because the idea is no matter who you are, no matter how frequently you use, you are always going to be impaired at this level.
Right.
And that'd be kind of crazy. Like, I'm not a big drinker. I'm not a teetotaler. I will drink, and I'm probably going to go to a party tomorrow night, and I'll have a couple drinks. But I'll walk home. I'm certainly not driving, go to a neighbor's house. But I can tell you at a .06, I should not be driving because I'm not drinking all of the time. If I did the field sobriety test at a .06, you'd be like, dude, you are the lightest weight I've ever seen, and I should not be operating a vehicle. That .08 was set at a relatively high level. I can tell you, like our neighbors to the north, so Utah and Colorado, they have per se limits. They're guesses.
On THC?
Yes.
I didn't know they had per se limits.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. If you are above, it's like 2 nanograms. Whatever the numbers are, they have a number, and it is purely guessing. The other problem is they're taking it from blood and they're taking it from urine, but THC breaks down. I'm certainly not the scientist, but it has something to do with fats. It's a fat soluble something. So it's a different way that we measure that than we would anything else. And right now it is not easy for us to measure that. So all we have are these sort of field sobriety tests. So I get if you are a medical user and you're a regular user, the nanograms to us mean literally nothing. Because, it used to be active metabolites.
Right.
Carboxy.
Decarboxy.
Yeah.
I remember reading the scientific analysis things.
Yeah, if we saw that those were there, like, okay, we're assuming that you're still under the influence. As our understanding has grown, we realize even that's not perfect.
Decarboxylate. Yeah, it's coming back to me. Anyways, yeah, I got you. I'm sorry.
But I think we're always going to be kind of limited to these field sobriety tests.
Yeah.
Because again, that number is going to be, to get it there, there's going to be litigation or there's going to be fighting over it. It's going to be awful. And then we have to probably get the federal government involved again. The .08 came from the federal government. I believe Utah's .06. They're the only one in the nation's not a .08 because the federal government uses the power of purse to force local state legislatures to do what they want to do, or they withhold funding. They'll withhold interstate funding and all those type of things. So I would not rely on the federal government in particular to solve any problems.
Right. Well, and the thing is, though, the scary situation is, though, is that, like, people want to live their lives. And again, for those who use cannabis, I will stand here and say, like I already said it earlier, like, cannabis saved my life, and I could be popping pills and not productive at all, or using cannabis. And it's just a scary proposition. But the conversation that I have with other people, though, is they're talking about, man, I got, I smoked and I wasn't high, or I wasn't whatever. I have an altruistic view of law enforcement. I feel as though I did things for the good of society, wanted to help people and all that. And I never personally saw, what's the word? Corruption. People, they were not getting beaten on the side of the highway. I never witnessed anything like that. Right. The corruption I saw was at the administrative level, but I'm not going to go there right now because we're not having that conversation, because that will go an entirely different direction.
Not here.
Right, not here. Yeah.
Okay, just make sure.
Oh, in Arizona?
No, Pinal County.
Not in Pinal County.
Okay.
No. Pinal County has been amazing.
Okay.
Amazing.
It makes me feel better. Even for lying, I feel better about
I
it.
never worked for Pinal County, yet I have, like we talked about earlier, I have full access to Pinal County. I've kind of become their spokesman in some way, but I love them. I love them all. And seriously, no, but anyways, so people talk about the fact, like, I wasn't even high. I smoked 2 hours ago and this and that. And I'm sitting here, the cop and me saying, okay, but you weren't, like, people were not getting, when I was in patrol, people were not getting pulled over for no reason. There was a reason. Okay, so what was the reason you got pulled over for? Okay, now that cop has to make the determination, are you under the influence? They probably did field sobriety tests. I go off of the working notion that cops are the good guys. Cops are well trained, particularly here in the Valley and Pinal County. Pinal County is not part of the Valley for people who don't know, but it's its own little wild west adventure down here. It's awesome. I'm never leaving Pinal County. But so I always go off of the fact of, yeah, but you were impaired. Like, there are people who say you cannot be impaired under cannabis because of our endocannabinoid system and all that type of stuff. Have you ever heard of that before? Endocannabinoid system?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't buy it. I mean,
I
I
don't
didn't
buy
mean
it
to roll my eyes. I wasn't trying to be disrespectful, but to say you can't, I mean, you can be impaired under a lot of substances.
And that's the point I'm making. I'm on the same side as you with that. I am not one of these deniers. I'm not one of these people who say, you can't be impaired. No bullshit. I'm telling you right now, when it's 11 o'clock at night and I'm tired and my back hurts, I am impaired after I use cannabis. If I smoke at 3 p.m. to ease a little bit of pain, no, I'm not impaired. I will probably smoke, and then 2 hours later, I will probably get in my car and drive. However, the amount that I consume at night is significantly different when trying to get to sleep and dealing with my back pain, or just having a little bit of pain in the middle of the day.
Right.
I want to take a Tylenol, so to speak.
Right.
So yeah, no, it's people have just been scared over the, what's going to be the outcome and all that. And we don't have the testing. We don't have any of that stuff.
We do a good job of having what are called DREs, or drug recognition experts. I'm guessing Frank may have chatted with you a little bit about them.
A little bit, yeah.
But we do really try and bring in those experts that are specifically designed. Now, a lot of people think that they're coming in with the specific intention of saying, oh, no, we know you're impaired.
Right. They
have no dog in this fight. The only dog that our law enforcement has in this fight is they just want us to be safe on the roads, particularly our patrolmen that are driving on the roads. They just, look, we don't even pull, I'm not condoning this, but we don't pull you over for going 5 or 6 or even 7 over. Usually you're going quite a bit over, or you're driving erratically. And the reason we're pulling you over is because you're engaging in a behavior that's endangering those around you. That's why we're intervening to begin with. So when we're looking at DREs, we're bringing them in because a lot of our just run-of-the-mill patrol officer doesn't have the training, and they're saying, I don't know if they're impaired. They might be, and they bring somebody in. The idea is these drug recognition experts are specifically designed to say, hey, is there impairment? And is the impairment sufficient enough that it places the public in danger? And if they find that it is, that's when we're going forward. But if they come in and say, look, no, there's not. I mean, we have cases, and it's I wouldn't say it's common, but it's certainly not uncommon, where our DREs say, no, they weren't impaired, and we see, and there is some actually substance on board, but at the end of the day, it wasn't impairing them, so we're not prosecuting that case. Gotcha.
Now, what are your? I have my own thoughts on this. What are your personal, not personal, but your thoughts on the people who say that, like, oh, the DRE program is based on pseudoscience and all that type of stuff? What would your response be to that? Because I'm sure you've had experts come in and say all that in court.
So science is always evolving.
Right.
And anytime we tell you we know anything with 100% certainty, your BS meter should go off. It is based on the best science that we have available, and there's multiple points. It's not like one thing. It's not, oh, your eye's bouncing, so we know. That's why there's 6, 7, 8 different field sobriety tests that we do, and it's the combination of all of them. It's also the reason why we have an adversarial criminal justice system. There's been plenty of cases where defense attorneys have come in and said, yeah, they may have been here and here, but they weren't here, here, and here. And the public comes out and says, yeah, that's not driving under the influence. And those are things that we as a law enforcement community continually look at. Okay, if these are not all there, they're not coming forward. I mean, we're continually evaluating these cases. So can I tell you in 20 years that I am willing to bet my life that the science is dead on? No. But it is based on the best that we have right now. And again, it's a totality of the circumstances, not an individual metric.
One of the things that my pushback on that, like I said, I'm on the side of law enforcement on like 90% of the things. And I was not a DRE, and I hated DUIs. I was a criminal interdiction guy. So when I would have to arrest a DUI because it hit my car or something like that,
right?
To watch a DRE do their work, I mean, the amount of training that they go through is very extensive. I've had really good DREs that, they call it on the paper what they're asking for, and then I get the drug results back, and they were spot on. So I understand that people can say things are pseudoscience, but how did he come to that conclusion every single time, or very, very close? So it's one of these things where it's like, I'm on your side, and I just wanted to get your take and opinion on that.
And know that the training they do the assessments on people that are under the influence, that aren't under the influence,
right? And
then we actually are validating. And they have to be accurate at X number of times before it's there. And again, we never rely just on the DRE.
Right.
It's also in combination with the blood results. We don't even use PBTs anymore.
Really?
They're not admissible in court. We do blood.
Do they do the side of the rotor?
They'll do it because it gives us an idea. They're like, yeah, I think they're there. But if it comes in, it's like a 0.02, they're probably not going to go any further with it. But if they're at a 0.08 or real close, then we're going to bring the phlebotomist in. We're going to do a blood draw.
Do they do blood on everything now, or do they still do the intoxilizer? Because I know the evolution of intoxilizer just went to the newest evolution. I never even used it.
This is not my area of expertise.
Okay.
So I know that I can tell you we prefer blood.
Gotcha.
But I believe some of the agencies certainly still do use intoxilizers, but that's usually at the justice court level, and I'm just not as involved with the justice
court
level.
That makes sense.
You want to talk homicides, I'm your man.
Gotcha, that makes sense. Okay, all right. And then guns and cannabis, state law. That is one of the big things.
Technically, we could probably prosecute it. We don't.
Why? How? So
That's not the intention of the
understood.
public.
And I'm going to say that I have had phone calls from DPS troopers that I used to work with that knew I understood the cannabis laws significantly better than they did,
Right.
who were on traffic stops that called me. And I said, let's break out the book. And so I have gone through, this is on medical, not recreational. This is on medical, where I said, okay, is the person a medical card holder? Okay, so let's look at 13-3405.
Right.
Well, it doesn't fit that criteria.
Right.
Okay, so if it doesn't fit that criteria, then it does not fit the criteria under misconduct involving weapons. So therefore, there's no crime. How could it technically be prosecuted?
Well, if you're over the threshold, is one that's there.
Sure, on the amount that you're allowed to have with you.
Correct.
Sure, okay.
I'm trying to think the other. I actually had a conversation because I anticipated this was going to be one of the discussions. What I can tell you is when I ask, have we prosecuted this at all since Smart and Safe Marijuana Act, I think that's
Right.
what it was the title. And the only time that we have, and it's been very limited, but there have been a couple, but each time it was when it was being used to facilitate a drug sale.
Okay.
So because you're not allowed to sell.
Okay.
And that's the only time when the gun was used. It wasn't there, a person wasn't driving and had a gun and also had marijuana, but they were literally doing a drug deal and the gun was brought as a protective measure in that drug deal. That's the only time that we've ever brought it. I believe there was a theory that they said if we really wanted to, we probably could. And they're like, are you asking me to? And I'm like, I am not asking you to do that. Because again, I think our obligation is to fulfill the will of the people. You do stupid stuff like that, I don't think I'd be your county attorney.
Right.
I mean, quite frankly, my responsibility is not to subvert the will of the people. It's not to substitute my judgment for everybody else. It's not that the county runs under the dictatorship of Kent Volkmer. It's really to fulfill what the people want to.
Of for and by the people.
Certainly. I mean, think about it. Our laws at its most basic sense are, hey, these are all of the rules that we agree to live by.
Yes.
That's what our laws are. It's just saying, hey, this is the square box. We all agree anything outside that box is too far. Now, we play with those lines someplace, but the general idea is laws are simply the rules of the game that we agree to abide by.
As a society,
Correct.
we have to have rules and laws in good order.
So I have no desire to, on those type of cases where, look, our community was pretty clear. They want to legalize marijuana.
Yes.
We also have a very strong Second Amendment right.
Yes.
Particularly in Arizona. I mean, obviously it's a constitutional right, but we, I think, hold it a little more dear here than perhaps some of our
In Pinal County specifically.
100%.
It's
Pinal
wild
County.
down here.
I can tell you that our sheriff was quite concerned when the ATF made some particular rulings about bump stocks and some other things, and he essentially said, I don't plan on enforcing these. What are you going to do? And I'm like, if you don't submit to my case, I don't proactively police. I'm not telling any officer what to do. I'm not going out saying you must do this.
Right.
We are an agency that receives submissions. So I can tell you that our sheriff's office had grave concerns about some rules, and they thought they were overly restrictive. I'm not telling you they necessarily turn a blind eye. They're just not looking for those things.
I agree. And so in regards to the cannabis and guns, like, somebody is a huge Second Amendment proponent and has guns, goes to the shooting range, secures their weapon, goes to the dispensary, picks up their allotment, drives home, gets pulled over.
We're not prosecuting that.
It's a no-brainer to me.
We're not prosecuting that.
It's an absolute no-brainer to me.
There's no reason to prosecute that. There's no peniological, there's no societal, there's no how does this make my community a better place? It doesn't. And really that's what we should be looking at. When I said earlier, kind of looking at the society, the fabric of our society, does that make us a safer and better community? I don't see in any way that it does, so it's not something that we're looking at.
You probably didn't even know that person had a gun. You probably didn't even know that person used cannabis. Right. So it's,
frankly, don't care.
Right.
I don't mean that like a condom. I don't care.
Right.
Like you have a right to have a gun. Have a gun.
Yeah.
You have a right to have marijuana. Have marijuana. I don't care.
It is the sort of thing, though, to me, like my background and dealing what I dealt with and all that good stuff. I just, in being a user, can't fathom anymore thinking that somebody who uses cannabis is violent. The two, to me, in my brain, and understanding what I use, I would much rather sit down and watch a Netflix movie than do anything else or go rob a bank. But you and I did have a conversation about, and I absolutely wanted to discuss this part with you
I
because
was wondering if you're going to bring it
oh,
up.
sure.
So, yes.
I think it's 100% relevant to the conversation. And please explain what it is that you had talked about.
Cannabis-induced psychosis.
Okay.
So purely anecdotal, because again, we don't have the science behind it. But what I can tell you is the single most violent murders that we've seen since I've been in office, every single one, immediately preceding that murder, there was an incredibly high amount of cannabis that was consumed and was found to be in their system.
Okay.
Or at least reported. We don't always get the blood results.
On a murder, do you guys immediately go for blood results?
No, we're not entitled.
I was going to say, so how did they end up getting the blood results on those?
Because they used weapons. So it wasn't shootings. These were using knives.
Okay.
Where they were stabbing people, stabbed themselves, where
Okay.
they had to actually go get medical treatment. And a lot of times they told us.
Gotcha.
Most times they actually were using it as mitigation, saying, look at this isn't, don't go death on this case. This isn't what they normally did. This happened because they were under the influence.
Okay.
And I can tell you, and really I think 3 that come to mind immediately, I think they had psychotic breaks.
Okay.
Based on their previous behavior, based on their already increased likelihood to suffer from some sort of schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder, there was something that precipitated it, and they were in, again, not a medical doctor, but a psychotic frenzy. I mean, you're talking about stabbing people 3, 4, 10, 15, 20 times with 2 or 3 different knives, breaking scissors off in skull, in bone, in those type of things. Like an absolutely rage-filled, without any sort of predicate offense that would make fun. It makes sense. It wasn't like they came in and, this guy was having sex with his wife and they just lost it. This was, killing family members. This was killing complete strangers in the most violent way you could ever see. And everyone that we've seen, at least that I'm thinking of right now, the most serious, there were, again, either reported, proven, or told to us a significant amount of cannabis that was consumed immediately preceding it.
One of the things I should have done before we started talking about this is we should have set the definitions. When I say the term cannabis, that to me personally encompasses everything that is marijuana, the green leafy substance, the wax, the vapes, everything.
Yes.
In a legal sense, in the state of Arizona, cannabis and marijuana are 2 very different things.
That is correct. And I've been using your definition because I knew that was your definition.
Yes.
But you're right, for the audience, we should have clarified.
Yes.
So cannabis is really the extract and not the green leafy stuff. We're talking about the THC that's been extracted. You'll call it wax, you'll call it honey, those type of things. Gummies, all of those type of things. The green substance is marijuana. Everything else is kind of cannabis.
Yes, and in the cannabis world, that's insane. But you know what I mean?
Right.
But like we had talked about it. So in these episodes of homicides where cannabis was used, marijuana, cannabis, whatever the case may be, it was the person predisposed. Do we know, was the person predisposed to those? You said that there was some sort of thing leading to a psychotic break. So this is where, and I want you to answer the question, but I was also going to give a little explanation too, is that like people who do that are schizophrenic and use cannabis, are they schizophrenic because they use cannabis, or were they predisposed to schizophrenia and are trying to self-medicate? And we don't have that information because of the lack of research.
What I can tell you is we had frankly, a very brutal quadruple homicide that occurred just a few miles from my house, where a 22, 23-year-old young man chopped his father's head off, his 5-year-old niece that was really his sister, and tried to chop the head off of his mother and his sister. And we did extensive. We initially went capital. Ultimately, it pled to 4 consecutive life sentences. The case is resolved. It's been sentenced, so we can talk about it. But we had a lot of experts that were consulting with us because this young man did have schizophrenia.
Okay.
He had a formal diagnosis, had been hospitalized and everything else, and that certainly played a role in ultimately what we were looking at. But what was described to me is schizophrenia is not a on-off. It's more of a continuum. And you're not static. You can go up. The impact of it can be more severe or less severe. And there's this sort of, think of an old school like Chevy speedometer where you can go back and forth. What we know is when he used marijuana, it caused his end of his needle on the continuum to go towards an actual psychotic break.
Okay.
Where we had examples of him responding to auditory and visual hallucinations. We had 911 calls where he was making no sense. Like there was a fairly documented history of severe mental health issues.
I think that's good information to have.
But we know that marijuana precipitated. In fact, we had medical records that showed that marijuana use precipitated the psychotic breaks almost always.
Interesting.
And he knew it, and he said, "I don't give a rat's rear." And he continued to use, knowing that he was going to have these psychotic breaks. That's part of the reason why we ended up initially going capital, is he made a conscious decision, knowing full well that he has these psychotic breaks. They were becoming more aggressive to continue to use, knowing that the negative consequence. The other case I'm thinking of, he also was diagnosed with schizoaffective or schizophrenia.
Okay.
And once I heard the explanation from our experts on that other case, I go back in time and look at that, and I think it's the same thing. I think they probably were self-medicating, but it would also precipitate this psychotic break. And then I look at the third case, and I'm thinking, and that kid had never had he was like a 19-year-old kid, never had a violent outburst in his entire life. He was really from Houston. He was trying to get to L.A. His vehicle broke down here. He was homeless here for a little while. There was really a good Samaritan woman who coming home from church saw him and said, "Hey, what's your story?" She took him to Wendy's, and they ate Wendy's, and she took him to Home Depot, and she was going to actually give him the bus ride so he could get to where he wanted to go, and he just absolutely snapped and stabbed her like 19 or 20 times with multiple weapons, just absolutely brutal and horrific. And again, he had he fully talked about it, and it is consistent with that psychotic break. And marijuana induced it. So what I have seen, and again, this is purely anecdotal because we don't have it. It seems that people have an already, I guess, likelihood to be able to have psychotic breaks.
Predisposition.
Thank you. I was just on like a predisposition for psychotic breaks. It seems that marijuana has sort of caused that break, or at least was impacting the break. But again, because we don't have the studies, we can't say for sure. That's just some of the things that we've seen. And it's not like I don't know of a single time where it's just, you or I that smoked a joint and then suddenly we're a homicidal maniac. That's not what I'm seeing. What I'm seeing is people that already have severe mental health issues. When they're using that, we're seeing these really negative consequences. And
to not have those conversations is just ignorant. These are absolutely positively things that need to happen. And I have heard other anecdotal stories of the exact same thing. There was a lawmaker too that was trying to get, THC caps and all that good stuff, that was trying to use this. And again, it is the sort of thing where what's the reality here? We don't know. And I'm not one of these people, again, that thinks that marijuana for everybody. Nope, not at all. There are some people that the addictive personalities and all that good stuff. And I'll sit here and say that, first and foremost, my caveat is always this, that the Drug Enforcement Administration themselves even admits in their drugs of abuse book that nobody has ever died from ingestion alone. You can't die. We have an endocannabinoid system. Our body knows what to do with it and all that stuff.
Right.
But at the same time, not everybody should use it. And an overdose on cannabis looks like anxiety, paranoia for the average person. For 99% of the people, 99.999% of the people, an overdose is the anxiety filled, the paranoia, those types of things, possibly hallucinations. There's not the psychotic break. What's the word I'm looking for here? The separation from reality, psychosis, the drug-induced psychosis.
Right.
That's not what happens. You get that. I've had stupid-ass moments where I'm like, oh, what's that noise? That's an overdose effect. That's an effect of being overdosed on cannabis. And then, you wait a little bit, you come down, and you're like going, oh, it wasn't Pinal County knocking on my door. It was just, whatever. So that's the thing, that we don't have the studies. We don't have the information. We need this information. If we're going to treat it as medicine, for God's sakes, let's treat it as medicine. Let's do some studies. Let's find out what the effects are of it.
So I will tell you my other frustration, and we've not talked about this, I don't think, so I don't know where you're at on this, but when they were talking statewide about the legalization process, there were a couple different versions of it, and one of the titles was "Regulate Marijuana Like Alcohol."
Okay.
Like that was a proposal.
Okay.
That sort of sticks with me because I really think, for all intensive purposes, they're fairly comparable. They're not identical,
right,
and you can nitpick it. But the one thing about alcohol that we know is, if I'm drinking a beer, I can look at it and I can see that it's 4.5% alcohol or 5% alcohol. Or if I'm drinking liquor, I can look at it and I know fairly accurately what the content of the alcohol is in this drink. And the alcohol is what's giving me ultimately the effect.
Yes.
One of my frustrations with marijuana is we don't know the concentration of THC in things.
It's supposed to be on the packages.
Yes.
It's supposed to be.
It is. It's supposed to be.
Is it correct?
It is not FDA regulated
Correct.
the way everything else is. There is not a clear, unequivocal standard where we know that it's there. And quite frankly, there's not an ability for us to come in because we can't legally do this. We can't come in and test it and say, oh, you said this is, whatever, 10%, and it's actually 14%. You're misleading the public, so there's going to be some negative consequence. It is really like, hey, we're trying to do you a solid. But because the science isn't there, because it's not abundantly clear, that is a frustration on my part. Again, how could we ever know how much the person consumed?
Right.
If we don't know even the quantity and what the impact, we were talking about, could there be an amount? Well, if we don't even know how much they're actually consuming, how can we possibly figure out what is too much and all of that? So that's one of the things where I believe, and I've been steadfast in this, I believe the voter initiative was not the way to regulate and legalize marijuana.
Okay.
I believe that was a mistake. Not the legalization itself, but going that route. I understand there was no other choice.
It was all bad. It was all like Mickey Mouse put together.
Yes, Frankenstein.
Yes.
I mean, that's what it was, is it was all the different groups that came together and said,
Yes.
okay, we need this, we need this. And what we've got is not a real cohesive, and it's very difficult for us now to, I think, modernize it and to really streamline the process and to make it better. Hindsight's 2020. I can tell you that quietly, because as a Republican, it was a no-no to be, supportive of it. But
Right.
privately, I did have conversations with legislators saying it's better that you guys have the power of the pen. But there just wasn't the appetite with a Republican-led
100%.
legislature to do it. And most of them, I think, acknowledged it. I think most of them realized that they needed to regulate it. They needed to write the laws. But I think the concern was the negative pushback, particularly in like a primary. You're going to get primaried and you're going to lose your job for doing it. And you're making people choose between what is kind of right and what is politically expedient for them in their best interest. And anytime you put people's best interest against what's right, you're putting people in a really difficult situation. And that's kind of what happened. But I really think, again, I think the federal government needs to get out of it. And I think we need to do a much better. I think we need to have a state standard. I think there needs to be a state lab. There needs to be testing. It needs to be regular testing. I'm not trying to increase the price, but
No,
okay, we hadn't had this conversation. I didn't know where you were going to be at with this.
1,000,000%. I don't want DHS to regulate it. I have very big issues with DHS. I'll say it. You don't have to.
I plead the fifth.
Yeah, I have very large issues with DHS, and also the labs are pay to play. There was a known lab in the state of Arizona that you go into this lab. Oh, you want that good flower that registers 27% THC, 32% THC? Take it to this lab. This lab's going to tell you the truth. This lab's not. It was all over the news. This lab is now shut down, though, thank God. But yeah, we need the standardized testing. Like DPS has a state lab. DPS could, in fact, be the state lab, but the Department of Agriculture has a lab as well. So agriculture has been doing recalls and testing and everything else for years and years and years. So this is like the stuff that we deal with down at,
So I would suggest, all things being equal, agriculture makes more sense to me, because DPS is really criminal. It's focused on criminal.
Right.
And quite frankly, they're overwhelmed the way it is.
Correct. Other than the fact that, like, the only reason I said DPS is because they have a top-notch lab.
Yes.
The people that work there are amazing. Like I said, I had a close personal relationship with them.
Multiple labs.
Yes, yes. But they are overworked. They are underpaid. They are, but their testing is top-notch.
Yes.
But the problem with the agriculture then is that you've got all these other lobbyists that deal with agriculture, and they don't want to touch it as well. We need our own Department of Cannabis personally.
I would have no
Yeah.
moral qualms with that. I mean, it makes sense to have experts in the field be the ones that are actually
Right.
the ones that are in charge. It's a crazy idea.
Like finding the people that know what they're talking about. That's a wild ass idea. No, I'm completely on board regarding testing, and also from a medicinal standpoint, I want to know exactly what is in my medicine.
Right.
And I think you'll probably agree with this, that a good medical consumer that is involved in their medicine is going to know a hell of a lot more about cannabis than most police.
Oh, yes.
You know what I mean? Most law enforcement agencies, because I know the breakdowns of the cannabinoids, what they do, all that type of stuff. I want to know exactly what's in my stuff. That should be tested. We should be treating it as medicine. It should have the same standards and all that type. If we're gonna talk about it like medicine, if we're gonna talk about it recreationally, then it should have the same standard as alcohol.
Yes, and again, I guess I was looking at it more when I was saying, analogizing it to alcohol. I was looking at it from the recreational. We're never getting rid of recreational.
Nope.
It's always going to be here. I just think people need to be able to know exactly what they're ingesting.
Amen.
And not take a guess. And again, I'm not suggesting that the companies are overtly lying. At least most of them.
Some of the companies are overtly lying. I'm in the cannabis world.
There's always bad actors.
Yes.
But I think the majority of people probably aren't overtly lying. But at the same token, are they? Is that really their focus?
Right.
I mean, good enough for me. It's close enough type thing.
Right.
And
good enough for government work.
Yes. I've got a buddy who likes to say, good enough for the girls I date. He's like, don't worry, I've been married for 20 years and I got a daughter. That's the only two that I'm dating here. So
that's a good quote. Yeah, but that's exactly it, is that there needs to be very heavy. And this is where I do believe in decriminalization with good regulation. But back in the day, you nailed it. You're 100% correct that the Republican Party in the state of Arizona was not on board. You know what the funny part is, though? I have personally ingested cannabis with 3 Republican state lawmakers. They would crucify me if I said their names. But again, it goes back to that whole, I smoke too. Yeah, nobody cares. Nobody cares.
That doesn't shock me in the least. It really doesn't. I mean, I can tell you the stigma is slowly wearing away. My wife is very conservative. I married the farmer's daughter.
Gotcha.
Like, just greatest woman on earth. And I have severe back issues. I have herniated discs right now. And she's like, just try it. She's like, for the love of Pete, so you can get a good night's sleep. She's like, just go take gummies. I mean, so even her at this point is sort of, and she's my bellwether. She's the one that really, I think, is a pretty good barometer of where people are at. And she's even saying, just try it. What's the worst thing that's going to happen? I'm like, well, the worst thing that happens is I like it too much.
Right.
I mean, just because of my personality. And again, that is unique to me.
Yep.
That's knowing me. Much like you said, you know you.
Absolutely.
I know me. That's the only reason I haven't. And I've been tempted on multiple occasions because I haven't gotten the relief. They won't do surgery on me because they don't know what's wrong and they can't guarantee that it's going to fix it.
Oof.
I've got some nerve issues. I've got, herniated discs.
We're in the exact same boat. Well, there is CBD as well, so we can have that offline conversation about some good CBD that is like zero psychosomatic effects or anything like that, but excellent pain relief. I can get you down that road.
We'll have to have that conversation because I'm certainly not opposed to trying different things. Same thing. I don't like taking anything.
We could also smoke a joint too, so that's whichever up to you.
The first time I do it is certainly not going to be on TV with somebody watching me or no.
Well, you're the county attorney.
It would be a very interesting look.
If we were like back east somewhere, maybe. A little more left-leaning as opposed to Pinal County.
I would still be very hesitant.
Oh, sure.
The very first reaction that, drunk Ken is different than sober Ken.
Right.
Put it that way.
Right.
So I don't know that I need to expose high Ken to the world.
But that is sort of the thing, though, too. Like, I'm sitting here saying I'm a cannabis advocate. I'm having conversations with county attorneys. I'm having conversations with law enforcement. You will not catch me smoking on camera. You just won't. I think there is an image. I think there is something that needs to be said about professionalism. I'm not trying to glamorize or glorify it, but I would be a complete hypocrite if I did not. If I had the benefits that I have received in my life, and I state that, again, I love cannabis because of what it did for me. If I sat here quietly and didn't say anything and would look at this, again, responsibly with intent and purpose. That's what I always say. It's like, that's my caveat about using it. If I just sat here quietly and didn't say anything, I'd be a total hypocrite and I wouldn't be able to live with myself. I'd like to, spread the gospel of it, but not in a pushy way or anything like that.
But I think you also view it primarily from a medical perspective.
Yes.
So how many people look into a camera, and take an oxy and pop an oxy and give a thumbs up?
Right.
I mean, that's when you treat it, you're treating it as medicine. It's nothing to be ashamed of or embarrassed. You talk about it, but it's also not glamorized. You don't record yourself. You don't do a TikTok video of you using, at least I don't see people properly using medication.
Right.
And they're like, hey, I'm going to get a good sleep tonight. Here's my Ambien.
Right. But also on the flip side, I'm going to be totally honest with you. I love the cannabis culture. I love the people who are loving it. And, you know, it's no different than going to bacon, barbecue, and beer down in Chandler, the big festival that they have. And people are high, you know, they got their cups and their red, what is it, the Red Solo Cup weekends and all that.
Yep.
You know, it's like, it's the same thing. And I love and appreciate the fact that people are using it responsibly. They're in a safe location. And again, you know, the dork in me, it regards like, yeah, this one tastes like this, and it's got different flavors, it's got different effects. You know, so it is very comparable when you're looking at it from the recreational side. But again, on the medical side as well, though, like I might ingest one, and it does everything wrong. And I'm like, that's not at all the effects I wanted. Like I will never get that particular one again. Right. That was all wrong. You know, I need this for anti-inflammatory properties and all this type of stuff. So I need to use that.
One of my best friends suffers from cancer.
Okay.
And he got a medical card, and he uses it to sleep at night.
Yep.
And he uses it in the morning after some of his chemo treatments. You know, he's not on them right now, but periodically he used them. But he had the same conversations. He's like, oh, this one is not. He's like, this one's perfect. I know I take it 45 minutes before I want to go to sleep. I take it, I go to sleep, and I can sleep. If I don't take it, I'm not sleeping. I mean, so I'm certainly not here to condemn. Again, I'm a live and let live kind of guy. I mean, as long as you're not getting behind the wheel and doing stupid stuff, and it's not causing, you know, getting back to that marijuana-induced psychosis. Right. That's my concern. If it's causing you to then become violent, then I've got concerns. But
that's an issue.
Yes. That's
a serious issue.
And I don't know how we address that. I mean, we need to study it. At the end of the day, we study everything. You know how complicated it is to get a drug to market through the FDA? I mean, you're talking years and years and years. You know, lives could be saved, but we take so long and so many steps, and we've not even started because it's a Schedule 3 drug right now.
Schedule 1, going to
Schedule 1, yes, right.
Well, you can also get a drug pass through the FDA if you pay a lot of money to the FDA. So, you know, the whole regulatory capture thing.
Look, I said it earlier. All you have to do is just leave it up to the states.
Yes.
I mean, then Amen. It will get studied. If it is no longer illegal, the universities will start studying it.
Amen.
And you know, this might surprise you, but when we do, what do they call them? The
wet workshops?
Yes. When we do wet workshops, it's shocking how many people are willing to come drink free beer. I'm fairly confident if you are going to offer college students the ability to go smoke free weed or take gummies or those type of things, you're going to be able to get the volunteers, and we're going to be able to get a really good quality foundational understanding in a fairly short order if we bring in our universities.
This I've had the conversation with Frank. I've had the conversation. Did I have with another one of the Pinal guys? It's like when you guys do a green, what do they call them? Green workshop, green. It's a specific term that they use for cannabis. I'm like, for God's sakes, call me. Right. Now, if you're using, you know, dirt weed, don't call me. I don't want the bad stuff. But no, but legitimately, like, let's get some data on the books.
But we also want you because you are a regular user. Yep. So you're right. Your tolerance is going to be different than somebody who's coming in, pardon the pun, but green. So somebody that doesn't usually use is less is probably going to be impactful. So I think we want, you know, when we do the wet bars, we want people that drink a lot to come in. We want people that very rarely drink, and we want people all in between because it kind of shows us the gamut of people that we see in the real world. So,
and for those people who don't know, it's, you know, law enforcement agencies do these type of things where I remember literally the one dude would drive down by ASU and see a group of people like going, "Hey, you guys want to drink for free tonight? Get in. Everybody over 21? Okay, get in." And those things got wild.
Yes.
Those things got wild.
And the Bureau of Liquor actually oftentimes supplies the alcohol for free too. It's just stuff that they've confiscated. So
the room that we're in was half of the amount of alcohol that was seized at DPS, where they were used for the law enforcement purposes. Like Absolutely. We were not pouring at the end of the day and drinking on the job. Right. That's not what I'm saying. But I mean, I remember I didn't even know that room existed. And when I went into the one time, I was like, holy shit.
Yes.
And that's the other thing that pisses me off is that, you know, 25 feet away, less than that, 5 feet away from us is my pantry with enough alcohol to kill everybody on this block. We have a lot of alcohol.
I'm saying
yeah, we do. Because you know why though? Because I used to drink. And so we still have bottles of Jack Daniels that I haven't touched in years. And I'm not sober for any other reason other than the fact that I no longer like alcohol. Like that's my thing. So why can I have so much alcohol to give enough people alcohol poisoning, but I'm only limited to this amount of cannabis? And I remember back in the day, like if I would pull somebody over and they had an ounce of cannabis, I was like, oh my God, that's huge. Now I'm like, an ounce? Shit. What am I going to do 3 days from now? I'm not that heavy of a consumer. I'm not. But you know what I'm saying.
I understand completely. And I don't have a good answer. I think it's just that, the analogy I used earlier, ripping the Band-Aid off, I think it's just marginal. I think there was only so much that the general public was willing to accept.
Amen. You have given me a ton of your time, and I did have a couple of very specific questions that I was asked.
You wanted to get something, is this marijuana? Because you wanted to talk about, I think, something with officers too. We took a pivot earlier, something about holding officers accountable.
Well, there's a lot of, there's a ton of eyes on, I'm sorry, I'm looking through this because I'm looking for the question that our good friend Julie posted to me.
She's trying to set me up.
I know, right? That you see all these constitutional First Amendment auditors and all that type of stuff, and I am for and against at the same time. I actually do believe that some actually provide a very valuable resource, and I believe that there's a lot of law enforcement that is improperly trained. But then at the same time, I'm like, there's a lot of assholes that shouldn't be doing it, that are just agitators. And so I see both sides of that. And I don't remember specifically where I was going with that, but it basically had to do with, getting our officers trained properly to follow constitutional protocols, which I believe personally in my own dealings, like Pinal County's been great at that.
I can tell you that we have pretty regular conversations with law enforcement about it because, your listeners that are back east, out here, we don't have nearly the ratio of law enforcement officers to the general public.
Right.
And our officers are almost always by themselves. There aren't partners. They don't put two to a cruiser.
Especially in Pinal County.
Yes.
And that's one, and I don't mean to cut you off, but like people who don't understand the absolute diversity of Pinal County, where you have like thousands of square miles of completely open desert, tribal reservations, big cities, and then middle of nowhere nothing. Like, this is like the hodgepodge of everything, plus border crimes, plus immigration issues, plus all of this stuff. So I just want to give people a little bit of background for people who don't know who Pinal County is. Like, it's extraordinarily diverse here.
And the concern is because if you pull somebody over at 11 o'clock at night, that pulling somebody over, that's one of the most, as an officer, you can attest this, it's one of the most dangerous moments that you're in because you don't know who's in there. You don't know if this person is a wanted felon. You don't know if this person is armed and means you ill will. You don't know if this is a person that's emotionally unstable. Nope. You don't know if it's somebody that just wasn't paying attention, was driving too fast, singing their rock song. You have no idea what's going on. But what ends up happening is when officers are going, they're on very heightened alert.
Yes.
They have to be. So some of these First Amendment auditors are coming in, and what's happening is they're being distracted. So our officers are concerned because now there's somebody behind them, and again, they don't know what that person, what their intentions are. Right. Oftentimes they have flashlights and they have cameras, right, and they're trying to focus here. And what's happening is now they're not able to give either one their full attention, which puts them even in a more precarious and dangerous situation. I mean, if you look at some of these attacks that we're seeing on law enforcement, I mean, they are just blindside attacks.
Yes.
And you're kidding yourself if you don't think our officers are aware of this, and you don't think our officers' wives and husbands are aware of this and aren't kissing their loved ones at night, telling them goodbye when they go into duty, saying, be smart, be safe, make sure you come home to me. So all of this is playing in our officers' minds. So it's not that they're trying to be jerks to these First Amendment auditors, but they have genuine concerns about their safety. And they're constantly working with us. Okay, what can we do that we're not infringing on their rights, but we're feeling safe and we don't feel like our safety and welfare is being jeopardized. So and it's kind of an evolving thing. I mean, as our communities change, that changes as well. Being in desolate middle of nowhere is a little bit different than being in the middle of downtown where there's lights and people going everywhere. So that is one thing that I really credit our sheriff's office with is I would say probably every 6 or 7 months we're just talking about what can we do, make sure that everybody's treating it exactly the same, because what I don't want is one deputy treating it different than a different deputy than a different deputy. And our sheriff and their administration has been very kind of forward thinking, saying, hey, let's make sure we're on the same page. Yes. Let's make sure that we're legally sound. And our office works with them on a pretty regular basis. And I'll tell you, our insurance company is involved with all of it as well, because we don't want to get sued.
Yeah, because again, that's the sort of thing where it's like, it's just going to cost you guys millions. It's going to cost the taxpayers millions. Again, if the law enforcement's doing their job to the best of their ability constitutionally, the county prosecutor's doing everything constitutionally, it's not going to lead to lawsuits. It's just fiscally responsible.
Absolutely.
So I did find those questions real quick.
I was trying to distract you, so maybe you'd forget them.
Okay, this is a good one. And again, this is coming from Julie. Arizona continues to have one of the highest incarceration rates in the nation and the world. Is Arizona wrong, or is the rest of the country? Are there tangible metrics we should be using to determine if incarceration is actually keeping Arizona safe?
So what I can tell you is we have gotten better. We're
Okay.
not where we need to get. If you look at corrections at a glance, you can just Google it. Every month, the Arizona Department of Corrections and Reentry and Rehabilitation, I think is their name, they put out on the 30th or the 31st, they take a snapshot of everybody that's in their prison, how many people we have, like 26 different categories they fit into. And you can look, and they have like a 4-year rolling cycle.
Okay.
If you look for about 5 years ago, we peaked at about 45,000 inmates.
Okay.
We're at about 35,000
Okay.
right now. So even though our population has grown, our incarcerated population's decreased by 20-some%. So that's great. Is it where it needs to be? No. Julie's question specifically, are we right or are they right? Depends if you get into that sort of progressive wing where you're not holding people accountable. I don't think that's right either. We need to be strategic about who we're releasing. I can tell you when our sheriff and I came in, we looked at it. Our average daily population rate was in the 700s. That's average every day. There's that many people that are sitting in our jail.
In jails.
We in Pinal County Jail
Gotcha,
specifically.
gotcha.
So we were like 725, something like that. I think when we took office, 730. We're at 534 as of last week.
Okay.
But what we did is we strategically looked at, kind of what's going on. We worked with our courts. So this isn't just something that the sheriff's office or just my office can do, but it's the criminal justice system as a whole. And we looked at it and said, are we putting people in jail because we're pissed at them, or are we put them in there because they need to be there for safety reasons? And we started to strategically sort of say these people don't need to be in there. We can certainly reduce our prison population just like we did our jail population, but it needs to be strategic. If people are sitting there, you alluded to earlier, if they're sitting there only because of a nonviolent drug offense or they've got mental health issues, prison's probably not the place they're getting help. It's not like we have a world-class rehabilitation facility in there. In fact, right now, when you go into prison, everybody, unless you're sentenced to death row, every male goes through Alhambra, and they're ran through a battery of assessments.
Okay.
And one of the assessments they look at is your amenability to treatment. And how they, in part, determine that is they look at whether you have any history of SUD.
SUD.
Substance use disorder.
Okay.
So according to DOC, the same document I was talking about, 82.9% of people as of March 31st of 2024, 82.9% would qualify for an SUD diagnosis.
I'm sure.
At any given moment, less than 2% of people are getting any drug treatment. And before they're released, they testified before the House Judiciary Committee at the state legislature, less than 17% get any treatment whatsoever.
But 82% of them are eligible.
Need it. Not just eligible, but need it. So what's happening is we know that people need it. We're not giving them those services. So putting them in prison doesn't do any good. I talked about the stats earlier.
Right.
Within 9 years, 5 out of 6 people, it's because we're not giving them the services they need. If we had a world-class rehabilitation facility and people come out better from our prison system, then having a higher incarceration rate would be justifiable. We don't have that. So we need to be smarter about what we use, how we use prison. And we only have completely locked up prison or completely free and nothing in between.
Right.
There's a whole gap that we need to provide. We need to do a better job of providing reentry services. So Arizona doesn't have it right. We're moving in the right direction. I've got a friend who says the trend is your friend. We are trending in the right direction. We have plateaued a little bit right now, but we've also seen sort of nationally a renewed focus on incarcerating.
Yeah.
We've seen an uptick, so the response is, okay, we got to throw everybody in prison.
It swung too far to the left.
Yes.
Now it's got to swing back a little bit to the right.
There are certainly people in prison that don't need to be there.
Yeah.
But you also have to give, particularly in the more rural communities, you have to give prosecutors other options.
And you said you had alluded to stuff like that earlier, particularly the rural communities where like that is going to have such generational impact, and that's going to have such huge impact for like if that's the breadwinner in that little area, that's it.
So I'll never forget a conversation I had with a colleague of mine. So there's only 15 elected county attorneys for the whole state of Arizona. This county attorney, he's a Democrat. He's pretty moderate, but he's an elected Democrat in a relatively small jurisdiction. And I was doing some data analysis and some digging. I work with DOC to kind of look at numbers. And Maricopa, Pima, Pinal County, our 3 largest counties, make up about 75% of our population. but we only put about 67% of people in prison.
Okay.
So that means the remaining 25% of the population are putting 33%
Yeah,
of people in.
yeah.
And I thought, well, that seems odd to me. So I started looking, and this one county in particular had a much higher incarceration rate than I would have guessed.
Okay.
So I just, certainly not accusatorial, but just, I think we were at a dinner one time, of prosecutors, and I said, hey, help me understand this. And what he told me, again, my words not his, but this was the gist of it. He said, Kent, we don't have a lot of services in my community. So if I have somebody that has severe mental health issues, I have to weigh, if I put them on probation, they're going to go back in the home with their family and they're going to victimize their family members. So I have to decide, do I want to do that or do I put him in prison? What is the greater public safety risk? Is it putting him in prison or is it allowing him to go back and to continue to victimize people in our community or in his home? And he said, and unfortunately, because I don't have any other options, oftentimes I have to err on the side of public safety and I have to send him to prison, not because I want to, not because I think it's in that person's best interest, but for at least 2.5 or 3 years, I know he's not victimizing these family members.
That's a terrible option.
It is a terrible, but that's
a terrible option.
So, but
he's doing the best. He, she, it, they are doing the best within their scope.
Yes, given the tools that they have available. Yeah. So that's why I'm hesitant to ever criticize anybody, because I frankly wanted to criticize him until I heard the rationale, and I'm like, I put myself in his shoes, and I don't know that I would make a different decision. Again, I said earlier, we're blessed. We have more options here. We have, access to both the Phoenix metro market and the Tucson market. We have providers that are coming in. We now have 500,000 people that live in this community. So our services are continually growing. We're in a much better position than he is.
And that just comes from a funding aspect, because there's more people that live here. There's more tax bases, and it's just larger funding.
Well, it also, though, you have to have enough people to sustain a business. So the problem is you can't have all these full service counseling agencies in a community that has 45,000. Some of our counties only have 45,000 residents.
Total.
Right. So what can 45,000 residents support? Maybe one mental health facility.
Right.
And then you put it over the size of, entire states. It becomes just a pure financial logistics issue.
Yeah. And people don't realize how ginormous the counties are in Arizona. They're freaking huge.
Yes. I mean, Pinal County is the same size as the state of Connecticut. So if you look on a map, literally, it's within like 20 square miles. It is the state of Connecticut. So what I would answer to Julie is I would look more specifically at the bigger counties, and I would not look at the smaller counties when we look at our prison rate.
Gotcha.
That would be my answer, just because it's a fair criticism to criticize me, to criticize Rachel, to criticize Laura.
Right. Understood.
It's not so much when you get to the smaller counties.
I think actually these two questions, I'm going to skip one of them, but these two questions I think are really good. What is the proper role of a county attorney at the legislature? Should the person entrusted with enforcing the laws also have a hand in writing them?
I'm very active at the legislature, so that puts me in a difficult position.
I'll answer that question. I think absolutely. I think something that is often overlooked, specifically when we're talking about expertise in an area, lawmakers want to change a law, this or that wants to happen. They're not talking to the law enforcement that has to deal with the laws they're enacting. So even in my role with Arizona Normal, I'm always like, let's talk to the cops. Like, let's invite the cops in. Like, I'm 100% for that.
Let me give you a perfect example of that. A couple years ago, Ducey was still the governor. There was a bill that was passed that was going to criminalize human smuggling.
Right. Now, are you talking about the one several years ago, many years ago?
Not SB 1070. There's a more recent one that was just passed within like 3 years.
Okay, gotcha.
So, and it was done kind of late in session.
Okay.
And Ducey was supportive of it. The Republican legislature was supportive of it. So he brought all of the sheriffs up, and they said, "Sheriffs, would you be supportive of this?" And they're like, "Hell yes." Didn't matter. It wasn't Democrat, wasn't Republican. They're saying yes, those supportive of law enforcement. Not one county attorney's office was called. They passed the law.
Was it constitutional?
No. No, it's not. The SB 1070 ruling is squarely on point. So now what I have officers and I have sheriffs that are kind of upset saying, hey, and legislators saying, hey, we passed a law to give you this authority, and now you're not doing it. Yeah, we can't because of the preemption doctrine. And like, this is clearly on point. Now, could they have, maybe wordsmith some things and potentially Yes, but they needed to have the county attorneys to be a part of that conversation. They didn't. They just sort of did it. I don't want to say in the cloak of darkness because it wasn't, but they didn't involve us. We weren't aware of it, and they said, "Here you go," and we're like, "This is a pile of crap." So, I will tell you, I'm very active. I don't carry a caseload, so I'm not actively prosecuting cases.
Right.
I'm leading a 142-person law firm. I'm the CEO of a
You're
law
the
firm.
boss.
But these conversations, this is part of what I do. Going up, educating our legislature, of the county attorneys, I'm there more than any other county attorney, bar none. Now, Maricopa County has a full-time attorney that works there.
Right.
And she does a phenomenal job, and Rachel will occasionally come down. But, I mean, I probably testified, I would say, north of 20 times before legislative bodies this session so far. And if they need me, I'm happy to go up and do it again. So, again, in a county our size, in the bigger counties, I think we should play a role in it.
Sure.
Once you get, again, below a certain size, they're actually the ones in the court.
Yeah.
So the role is very different depending on your jurisdiction, depending on the needs of your community. Look, I've got a great chief deputy. I've got a great civil chief deputy. Both of those guys have darn near 40 years experience each in those respective fields. So I know if I leave, my house is in order.
Right.
I know there's people there I can trust. That's not always the case in all the jurisdictions. So if your office can hold it, I believe the county attorney's office should be very active there. But you have to make sure your house is in order, because this is the way I prioritize it. It's Pinal, then it's the state. And if we're not good here, then I can't worry about statewide issues.
Right.
So, and that's how I would tell any prospective county attorney how they should look at it. Make sure your house is in order, and once it is, then I think you need to have that voice.
Yeah, you're held accountable by the people of your county. That's what it is, and everything that you've said has been very fair and balanced. Like, I don't think even offline conversations, you're not being a different county attorney when the cameras get turned off. Everything you have said has been very fair and balanced. Like, there hasn't been any extreme, nope, all these people don't need to go to prison or anything like that. Now, there was one other good question, and you actually kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, and it was regarding what you had said regarding the sheriff's department and the ATF ruling in braces and all that. Are constitutional sheriffs breaking their oaths of office when they decline to enforce laws they disagree with? And I have a response to that as well, but I do want to hear yours. Don't you love Julie?
What I would say is, if they have no reasonable good faith belief that there's a constitutional issue with the law, then I think there's a problem.
Okay.
If they believe that there is a legitimate constitutional issue with the constitutionality of that law, then I don't think they're breaking that oath. This is a conversation Mark and I have had on numerous occasions. Yeah. And Mark's like, this is what I think. This is why I think it. I think this is government overreach. You know, we can go back to COVID. Ducey wanted us to do certain things. Our county refused to comply with those requests. So he started doing these, I called them executive fiats. They were technically executive orders. But there was some questions as to the authority of those and the enforceability of those.
Okay.
If there is a legitimate question, I think he can use his authority as an elected official to say, hey, this is just not something that we're going to choose to use our limited resources on. What I would throw back to Julie, again, I'm not trying to have a proxy war with her, but had marijuana not been legalized, let's assume that this was never there, and she was elected as the Maricopa County Attorney as she ran for, I'm fairly confident that Julie would not have prosecuted marijuana offenses.
Well, and I'm going to piggyback on exactly what you said. When she was running and the abortion question came up, she had made the statement that she would not enforce it. And the funny thing was that the current, what's her name, Rachel Mitchell, didn't have a stance, but then later came out and said the exact same thing. So I do believe that I think those are both hand in hand, the exact same thing. There's a constitutionality question of it. It's not just willful this. It's, there's a question that, like, I'm not going to enforce this because.
Well, but I think marijuana, I think she was just not going to because.
She's on the board for Arizona Normal?
No, but I'm saying if it was illegal and the voters, and you just choose not to, I have more concern with that. I think that is much more akin to these constitutional sheriffs. People are upset with constitutional sheriffs, but we don't seem to have a problem when a county attorney blatantly says, I'm not going to prosecute this offense. Larry Krasner in Philly doesn't prosecute drug cases.
Gascon doesn't charge the shoplifting.
He won't charge shoplifting. He won't do aggravators if you harm a police officer.
Right.
He just absolutely says, I'm just not going to do that. I find that to be no less, in fact, maybe even more offensive than a constitutional sheriff saying, these are my beliefs. Because when the constitutional sheriff is running, it's not like they're hiding it. It's not like they suddenly,
right.
And the
Very
people are
valid
saying
point.
that's the person that I want. So I think we have to give a lot of autonomy and discretion to county attorneys and to sheriffs and other law enforcement officials. And if the people don't like them, the ultimate decision is made at the ballot box.
Amen. I completely agree with that, and that's exactly it. I mean, as an elected official, yes, we're, choosing to elect an elected official off of what their policies are, but also their personal standpoints.
Right.
You're not going to get up there and only speak policy. You're going to speak about who you are, what your beliefs are,
Right.
what your values are, and then we the people, are going to make the decision, yes or no. So.
And there's recall. I mean, if you're making the decision wrong and the people don't want you, there is a mechanism for the people to bring it back and say, no more.
It's difficult, but
it is.
It's possible.
The reason it's difficult is because you can't have somebody always looking over their shoulder for every decision they make.
Right.
But at least every 4 years, you're called to account.
Right. Sir, you have given me over 2 hours of your time.
I didn't realize it went pretty quick. I did not realize it was that long.
That makes me happy when people say that, because all right, I'm not like dragging on. But is there anything that you want to add? Anything for the people? Don't drink and drive.
Yes. So no. The drinking and driving and the impaired driving is a major issue in our community. If you look at counties that share their stats, so think of like Maricopa County, Yavapai County, some of the other counties, our felony DUI rate's about twice as high as any other county.
Really?
Part of the reason is we have 500,000 people driving on an infrastructure system that's designed for more like 250 or 300,000
Don't get me started on the infrastructure down here.
But I mean, that's the issue. So what happens is, there are not multiple ways to get places.
True.
So if you're in the valley and, you had a couple of drinks, oh boy, if I go down this way and this way, I never have to hit any major roads. I can get home. Everything will be fine. That doesn't exist here. So what happens is when you choose to drive drunk or under the influence in our community, the likelihood of you getting caught's higher, but also the likelihood of you potentially being put in a situation where you're going to have to react quickly because we have so many people on so few roads. Your bad driving behavior is amplified. Yeah. And we see way too many deaths. It's almost a weekly basis that we're seeing, people dying on our roads here in Pinal County, and that's our community. So I know we don't have much of an Uber system or any of those, Lyft and all of the various other things, but please think twice, get a DD, just don't drive under the influence, because I have no choice but to put you away. I mean, there has to be consequences there.
Amen.
And I'm not trying to put you in prison forever, but there will be consequences. We can't turn a blind eye. We can't say, yeah, I know that you had a rough day. I can't say, I understand that you're celebrating your son graduated. I mean, I understand why you're drinking, and I've got no problem with you drinking. I'm not here to bust you. I understand why you're choosing to toke up. Whatever you're doing, I get it. I'm not here to bust you for that. But once you get behind the wheel and you put other people's safety and well-being in danger, that's when I'm afraid, or that's when I'm concerned. That's when we have to get involved. So please, 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 drive safe, drive smart. Do not drive impaired.
If people wanted to learn more about you personally, where would they go?
I think I have a website. It used to be kentvolkmer.com.
Okay.
I don't know. I'm a relatively quiet guy. We alluded to it earlier. I've got a 14-year-old, 12-year-old, 9-year-old sons.
Gotcha.
So I am constantly going to baseball games and flag football games, and I coach their basketball and that type of stuff. But if you want to have a conversation with me, I'm willing to have the conversation. If you want to learn more specifically about some of my philosophies, I've got presentations. Right now, I'm really focusing on fraud education, particularly in the senior community.
Okay.
So if you've got a group, I would prefer it not to be one person. This is different because we can reach lots and lots of people, but I'm more than willing to go to church groups. I'll go to civic organizations. I really don't care if you're a Democrat, if you're a communist, if you're a Republican, if you're an independent. I don't care. I'm the county attorney for everybody. I'm the county attorney for the accused. I'm the county attorney for the victim. I'm a county attorney for everybody that lives in this county. I'm your county attorney, and I view my responsibility as being available to you. So I'm more than willing to have the conversation. And frankly, this is the easiest way. It's just to sit down and have conversations.
And the Pinal County Attorney's Office does have its own podcast as well.
We do, yes. It's called Courtroom Chronicles with the County Attorney.
That's awesome.
So we do, it's a case, and then the next episode is more just information, and then a case and information. So
Okay.
some of the more infamous cases. We talked about the quadruple homicide earlier, so that case is one of the cases that we've talked about. There's been some teen violence that have occurred, and we just kind of talk about just the way the cases are there, and then but there is some philosophical stuff, there is some theory, there is some plea agreements, and the way the system actually works, and all of that stuff as well.
Very cool. Well, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you.
Awesome.
Thank you. Thank you.
What's going on, everybody? This is AJ. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you're getting anything out of these videos, I do please ask, go like, comment, subscribe on YouTube, on Instagram, on all that stuff, Blue to Green podcast, Blue to Green official podcast. It helps me, it helps the channel, it helps get this message out. I'm not perfect at this. There's a lot of things I need to work on. There's a lot of things I'm trying to understand. I'm doing all of this on my own, including the editing. So if it's shit, I'm sorry. But I'm trying to bring you better content and have different conversations with different people, such as Mr. Ken Volkmer with the Pinal County Attorney's Office and with law enforcement officials, and trying to bridge the gap between the cannabis community and the law enforcement community and criminal justice reform in a positive way that keeps us safe. So I thank him for his time. I thank you for watching. And seriously, drop me a comment. Let me know how I'm doing. If it's shit, okay, great, tell me that. If it's, if you're enjoying it, thank you. I appreciate that, and let me know. So thank you very much, everyone. Take care. I appreciate all of you.